My son and I are beginning a fancy life in another country with his $3 million. His mother warned, "If you two split up, you won't have enough money." Then she added, "If you want our new address, you'll have to beg and lick my shoes." I was confused and asked, "What? What are you saying? What do you mean?" I had no idea they were planning to move abroad or saving up so much money. She explained, "I meant my son inherited $3 million. We're going to live a wealthy life overseas, just the two of us. Why would my husband leave the country? And why are you talking about $3 million? Why are you being so secretive?" "Well, if you're really curious, get down on your knees and beg while licking my shoes, and I might just tell you." "Why are you being so rude? Where is my husband?" "We're quite comfortable here. We're living it up with my son's $3 million. So you're not needed anymore." I was shocked by what my mother-in-law said. How could my husband suddenly have $3 million and be living a luxurious life abroad? And the way she talked, as if I didn't belong. I felt a mix of anger and worry, but I knew I needed to stay calm and figure things out. How did my husband get all that money? And could it be connected to? I work as a manager at a big tech company. My husband and I met there, and I was attracted to his upbeat personality, which led to us getting married. His parents welcomed me warmly at first. Later, we had a daughter who's now 14. I grew up poor with difficult parents. Having faced many challenges, I was determined to love and care for my daughter deeply, while also managing work and the household. Then, one day, my husband had to move to Texas for a project. "It's going to be tough being alone with our daughter," I said. "Yeah, balancing work, chores, and taking care of her will be hard." "Maybe we should ask my mom to come and help," my husband suggested. "That could be a relief," I agreed. So I reluctantly agreed to let my mother-in-law move in with us. "Mommy, when will Daddy come back?" my daughter asked. "It looks like he'll be in Texas for a while, but don't worry. Gran was coming to stay with us," I reassured her. And so, my mother-in-law came to live with us. Little did I know, this decision would turn out to be the biggest mistake of my life. "You're working late again today, huh? Women who neglect their families." I'd hear biting remarks from her when I came home from work. "I have a job too, and I take care of our daughter." I'd argue back, but she was never satisfied. "When I was young, family was everything. I never even thought about working outside," she'd say. Then one day when my daughter did well in school, she said, "It's all thanks to me. What's the point of you? Maybe we don't need you around." Even though my mother-in-law only helped with easy homework, I was the one teaching my daughter most subjects. And if I made a small mistake with cooking, she'd jump on me, saying, "How did you and my son even survive before with such poor cooking skills?" "I'm doing my best, and everyone has their own way of doing things," I'd snap back. My patience was running out. "She doesn't do her chores," she complained to my husband. "Mom, she's working too. Please try to understand," my husband would say, trying to mediate. But as we continued living together, the relationship between my mother-in-law and me became more strained. With my husband far away, I felt even more isolated. One day, I decided to call my husband to talk about it. "Hello, are you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. What's on your mind? It's kind of late." "Well, your mom gave me a piece of her mind about house chores, and it's really getting to me." I explained to my husband over the phone. "I'm sorry. Mom's always been a bit sharp-tongued, but maybe she has a point. Still, don't let it get to you too much. Just keep doing things at your own pace," he comforted me. Feeling a bit reassured by my husband's words, I tried to focus on our daily routine again. But with my husband away, the pressure from my mother-in-law kept building, and I was getting more and more tired. Every day, I eagerly awaited my husband's return. Living with my mother-in-law without him around was tough. At first, I coped by clinging to reminders of him. But as time went on, her behavior became unbearable, and I felt overwhelmed. She criticized everything I did, from morning till night. Even when I made my husband's favorite rice dish, she coldly remarked, "This tastes terrible. Who'd eat this?" Whenever I took a short break, she'd scold me, saying, "How can a woman who can't even handle household chores take a break?" I never felt very confident about housework. With my husband, he just laughed off my mistakes. But with my mother-in-law, I felt like I couldn't make any mistakes. I think she treats me this way because she loves her son so much. She can't accept that he got married and moved away from her. This experience made me determined never to become an overbearing parent like her. One day, after treating myself to a small shopping spree at a local mall, my mother-in-law found out about it. When I got home, she was waiting for me at the entrance, furious. "How could you go out for fun when your husband isn't home? What about the household chores?" "I thought I needed a little break," I replied. "A break? In this situation, all this trouble is happening because of your incompetence," she scolded. After that, I hoped for a call from my husband. I thought hearing his voice might make me feel better, but what he told me was far from comforting. I have some bad news. My work in Texas isn't going well. I got into gambling, and now I'm in serious financial trouble. I've accumulated a lot of debt, he confessed. What? Are you serious? Gambling? In debt? This is completely unacceptable. What's going to happen to our future and our daughters? I exclaimed, feeling shocked and worried. I'm sorry, truly sorry. I feel trapped right now, but believe me, I'll figure it out, my husband apologized. How? How do you plan to fix this? How much do you owe? I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the news. I always saw my husband as honest and sincere. He never seemed like the type to gamble. He was always on time for our dates, and when we lived together, he always came straight home from work. He thanked me for every meal I cooked or every load of laundry I did. His sincerity and honesty were what made me fall in love with him. But with him away and my mother-in-law's constant criticism, life felt unbearable. I can't believe someone as useless as you married my son. My mother-in-law's words pierced through me, sinking my heart deeper into despair. Since my husband started working away, I've been constantly blamed and criticized by my mother-in-law. His recent confession about his debts and gambling only added to my despair. The weight of it all became too much to bear, and one night, I left the house and found myself crying on a park bench. Then, one day, my mother-in-law uncovered a secret from my past. During dinner, she used it against me. "So, I heard you used to work in a nightclub, huh? Shame on you for raising my grandchild after working in such a place," she sneered. "How did you find out about that?" I asked, feeling shocked and embarrassed. I was telling an acquaintance about how useless my son's wife is and showed them a picture of you. They recognized you. "Apparently, you weren't even good at that nightclub job," she taunted. In my past, fed up with a mother who never worked and always partied, I left my family home. Struggling for money, I found a job at a nightclub. It was before I married my husband, a secret I believed he didn't know. I was speechless. I never thought my mother-in-law would uncover this about my past, and she kept using it to attack me. "I can't believe someone like you is the mother of my grandchild. I'll tell my son and have you kicked out," she threatened. My despair deepened. It felt like everything I had with my husband, all the efforts I put in, and the future I dreamed of were taken away with her words. My husband's communication became scarce. I worried he started doubting and suspecting me. Alone in my room one night, I reflected on my life, meeting my husband, our marriage, and our current struggles, along with my mother-in-law's constant blame and accusations. I felt like I couldn't continue like this. "I can't take it anymore," I whispered, walking out into the lonely nighttime streets. The silence of the streets echoed my despair. My mother-in-law's words about my past, my secrets, and my present haunted me. Everything became a target for her criticism and blame. I sat on a bench in a park, staring up at the sky. Not a single star was visible. My heart felt just as dark. Suddenly, someone approached. "Mom, why are you here?" My daughter sat next to me, holding my hand. "Mom, don't let Grandma get to you. You work hard at an IE company and you've been through so much. You're strong." Thank you. But maybe Grandma has a point, I replied. Mom, Grandma's just stuck in the past. In today's world, you should be proud of any job you've done. I'm proud you worked at a nightclub, she reassured me. Really? Yes, because it shows you've always tried your best for us no matter the circumstances. Don't let Grandma's words control you. My daughter's words touched my heart, and tears welled up in my eyes. Mom, you're working hard in IT now, right? That's amazing. I'll always be on your side, no matter what Grandma says. Gratitude flooded my heart. With my daughter's support, I felt hopeful that we could overcome any challenges together. Later, in my husband's study, I took a deep breath before diving into a pile of paperwork. I carefully went through each document, trying to uncover his secrets. Bank statements, credit card bills, loan agreements. Slowly, my husband's financial situation started to make sense. Why did this happen? I discovered several receipts from gambling activities, horse racing, slot machines, casinos. It was heartbreaking to think about how much money he had wasted on these activities. Next, I turned on my husband's computer. The password was his birthday, but reversed. His inbox was overflowing with collection emails from financial institutions and messages from friends demanding repayment of loans. Additionally, I found a lot of promotional emails from gambling-related websites. I decided to calculate how much my husband had spent on gambling. The total was a staggering $3 million, far more than I had imagined. Seeing that amount, I felt a moment of panic, but there was no time to waste. I started to plan how to secure funds to support our livelihood. I thought about my savings, the money we could get from selling our expensive electronics and luxury items at home, and the money I had saved from my salary. After that, I kept up with my investigation. Every day, I worked hard, reaching out to financial institutions to understand the extent of my husband's debts and obtaining his credit information. A few days later, I devised a plan. I started getting ready to build a life where I didn't have to rely on my husband or mother-in-law, and I also figured out a way to pay off his debts. Using my background in the IT industry, I decided to take on freelance projects. For several days, I built up a portfolio and signed up on a website for freelance jobs. Then, a few days later, I got my first request from a client. This will help a bit with our living expenses, I thought. In between working on projects, I went over our household finances. I canceled unnecessary subscriptions, cut back on unnecessary spending, and found ways to save on groceries. I managed to lower our daily food expenses as much as possible. Also, based on advice from local moms, I participated in a community yard sale. I managed to sell some high-end items and extra electronics we had, making a decent amount of money. A few weeks later, my freelance work was going well, and I felt like my income was becoming steady. By then, I had enough money in my bank account to cover our living expenses. When I got home one day, all of my mother-in-law's things were gone. At the same time, my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. "Oh, are you back already? You must have noticed our stuff is gone," she said. "What are you trying to say?" I asked. "My son and I are starting a luxurious life abroad with his $3 million. If you ever think of divorcing him, you won't be able to make it on your own. If you want our new address, get on your knees and lick my shoes." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Actually, that $3 million is a debt," I said. "Stop joking. There's no way my son has that kind of debt," she replied. "You may not believe it, but it's true. In his study, there are transaction records from banks and financial institutions, credit card bills, contracts, and more. Plus, on his PC, there are collection emails from financial institutions, messages from friends demanding repayment, and promotional emails from gambling sites. If you don't believe me, why don't you check?" I suggested. "You're lying," she exclaimed. "It's the result of his gambling addiction. Horse racing, slot machines, casinos. All in all, it amounts to a whopping $3 million. I just sent you photos of the evidence. Maybe you should take a look," I said calmly. I had no idea. He probably didn't want you to know, But it doesn't change the facts, my mother-in-law admitted. I've been thinking about how to deal with this huge debt, but I guess I don't have to anymore, I responded. There was a moment of silence on the phone as my mother-in-law processed the information. I truly didn't know. I don't know what to say, she finally said. Without another word, I ended the call. From that moment on, I was determined to start a new chapter in my life. I was shocked by my husband and mother-in-law's actions, but I knew I had to move forward for the sake of my daughter and myself. Later, my husband called. I'm so sorry. Truly, I am, he apologized. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it, but my anger didn't fade. How did it come to this? Our family is breaking apart because of you. I never thought it would get this bad. But when I decided to go overseas with Mom, I couldn't see a future with you and our daughter, he confessed. I was stunned by his words. You couldn't see. It's because of your recklessness and lack of planning that our family is in this mess, he accused. I understand that, but it's too late now. I made a promise to Mom. What promise? I demanded. One, to sacrifice our daughter's future and grab a paradise just for ourselves, my husband finally admitted. There was silence for a moment. Did you truly love our family? I asked. I did. But now it's different, he responded, his voice breaking into tears. Don't hurt us anymore. My daughter and I are going to live on our own from now on. We'll forget about you, I declared firmly. There was no response from him, only the sound of his sobbing from the other end. Calmly, I hung up the phone. The reason my mother-in-law mistook assets for debts was due to a sudden bill of $3 million that arrived at our home. She thought it was a lottery-winning notice and began planning to move overseas, unaware of the misunderstanding. My husband, thinking starting a new life abroad would solve the debt problem, agreed to her proposal, mistaking the bill for a lottery notice. After that conversation, I set aside my anger towards my husband and started looking for a lawyer. I was determined to prepare for a divorce, seeking compensation for emotional distress and child support. A new life was about to begin for me and my daughter, independent from my husband and mother-in-law. I sought advice from a lawyer regarding divorce proceedings, emotional distress compensation, and child support claims. During this time, my daughter and I bonded deeply, and she became my biggest supporter. She fully understood my decision and chose to stay with me. Her words brought me comfort and made all the struggles with my husband and mother-in-law seem worth it. Tears of gratitude filled my eyes. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law and husband faced challenges in their new life overseas. Despite their efforts, they encountered problems due to lack of preparation and financial issues. To make matters worse, they were pickpocketed, losing their remaining funds, and struggled with the language barrier. Ultimately, they were deported for overstaying their visas. Later, I negotiated the terms of the divorce with my husband through our lawyers. The divorce was finalized, and we agreed that he would pay emotional distress compensation and child support in a lump sum. Thank you. Now I can finally begin a new chapter in my life, I said, feeling relieved. But all at once? Wouldn't it be better in installments? I suggested to my husband regarding the lump sum payment. It has been. I ended up taking on even more debt, borrowing money from some shady loan shark, he admitted. I don't know what happened to him after that, and honestly, I don't care, I replied, feeling detached from his struggles. After being evicted from her rental property and losing all her savings to pickpockets, my mother-in-law ended up homeless upon her return to the U.S. My daughter and I embarked on our new life. It wasn't always easy, but being free from my husband and mother-in-law, we could look to the future with hope. I wanted to live happily, working together with my daughter, who had saved me from the depths of despair.
The sound of Elsie's muffled sobs greeted me as I stepped into Derek and Marlene's house to celebrate my granddaughter's 12th birthday. My heart sank. Those weren't the joyful cries of a happy child. I followed the noise down the hallway to a room with a steel door, no decorations adorning its cold surface. "Derek? Marlene?" I called out, knocking firmly. No response. I pressed my ear against the unforgiving metal. Elsie's whimpers grew louder. intermingled with the familiar scratching of pencil against paper. Using the spare key Derek had given me, I unlocked the door. The sight before me ignited a fire of rage within. My sweet Elsie sat hunched over a piano keyboard, red-eyed and frazzled. The room was dimly lit and lined wall-to-wall with music sheets, like a prison cell designed to strip her of creativity and joy. "Elsie!" I gasped, darting to her side. She flinched, her listless gaze slowly meeting mine. "Honey, what's going on? Are you okay?" Before she could respond, the door burst open. Marlene stood fuming, her face contorted into a scowl that sent shivers down my spine. "What are you doing in here?" she growled, snatching Elsie by the arm and wrenching her away from me. "I told you not to disturb her practice," Elsie whimpered, trembling in Marlene's vice-like grip. "But Grandma!" "Silence!" Marlene's shrill voice silenced her pleading cry. "You know the rules. No distractions until you've perfected this piece." "Marlene, that's enough!" I stepped forward, shielding Elsie with my body. "What kind of hellish prison is this? She's just a child, for God's sake." Marlene's glare could have melted steel. "Stay out of this, Mother. You're too soft on her. Elsie has a gift, and I'll do whatever it takes to nurture it." By locking her away like a caged animal? Look at her, Marlene. She's absolutely miserable. Tough love is necessary to achieve greatness, something you never understood with Derek. She spat the words like venom. "I won't let Elsie squander her talents like her father did. Not on my watch." My blood boiled, but I refused to engage her twisted rationalization. Keeping my tone measured, I turned to my trembling granddaughter. "Elsie, sweetheart, go wait in the living room. I need to have a talk with your mother." Elsie hesitated, her eyes pleading for an escape hatch. But Marlene's iron glare subdued her momentary courage. With a defeated sigh, she slumped out of that wretched room, not even bothering to grab her belongings. As the door clicked shut, I wheeled on Marlene, aiming my fiercest look straight into her delusional eyes. "How dare you treat her this way? Have you lost your mind?" Marlene scoffed, folding her arms defiantly. "I'm giving her the training, the discipline that she needs to become a world-class pianist, something you could never comprehend." "And at what cost?" I demanded, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Her childhood? Her happiness? You're stealing her spirit away, piece by piece." "Don't be so dramatic." She rolled her eyes. "I'm doing what's best for her future success. Unlike you, I'm not going to let my child's potential go to waste." Her words stung, dredging up past failures I thought I'd buried long ago. But this wasn't about me or my shortcomings. It was about protecting Elsie. I steeled my resolve, meeting Marlene's contemptuous glare with unwavering determination. "If you think for 1 second that I'll stand by while you crush that poor girl's soul, you're gravely mistaken. This ends now." The battle lines were drawn. As Marlene and I stared each other down in that dimly lit chamber of horrors, I knew there would be no turning back. For Elsie's sake, I had to fight and win. After my confrontation with Marlene, I stormed out of that cursed house, my mind racing. How could she treat Elsie that way? My own granddaughter, sobbing and imprisoned like a common criminal? The thought made me ill. In the days that followed, I did some digging into Marlene's past. What I uncovered explained a lot about her twisted motivations. Marlene came from an affluent family with a reputation for musical excellence to uphold. Her own mother, a celebrated concert pianist, had groomed her relentlessly as a prodigy from a young age. The pressure crushed Marlene's passion, but she dutifully followed the path laid out for her, until she faltered during a career-defining recital at Juilliard. That failure shattered her psyche, and her family promptly disowned her in disgrace. The revelation crushed her dreams and her spirit. She spent years drifting aimlessly until meeting my son Derek. Somehow, the strength and stability Derek provided helped Marlene regain her sense of purpose. But the wounds of her childhood never healed. Her obsession with molding Elsie into the musical icon she could never become only grew more ravenous, more unhinged. I knew then that if I didn't act fast, Marlene would rob Elsie of her very identity. A few days later, I invited myself over again, this time with the pretense of a family chat. As expected, Marlene treated me with icy disdain, but I refused to back down. "You can't treat Elsie like a circus animal forever," I scolded her in the living room. "She's a growing girl who needs freedom, friends, sunshine." Marlene rolled her eyes. Don't start with your sentimental crap again. All that matters is hardening Elsie's focus, eliminating distractions. That's the only way she'll reach her full potential. By destroying her spirit? I cried incredulously. On cue, Elsie shuffled in looking ragged and exhausted. There you are, lazybones, Marlene snapped. Get over here and show Grandma how far we've come. The haunted look in my granddaughter's eyes as she took her place at the piano keys will forever be seared into my brain. Slowly, mechanically, she began playing an intricate Mozart piece with cold, clinical precision. Not an ounce of passion or joy flowed from those nimble fingers. When she finished, Marlene turned to me with a triumphant smirk. You see, perfection takes sacrifice. That's something your pathetic son could never grasp. Before I could object, Elsie suddenly collapsed into a fit of shuddering sobs. In a flash, I was at her side, cradling the poor girl as she cried into my chest. Please. No more, she whimpered between ragged breaths. I can't do this anymore. My blood boiled over as I glared at the vile woman towering over us. Are you happy now, you wretched hag? Look at what you've done to her. Marlene's face flushed a deep crimson, her lips curling into a sneer of pure contempt. How dare you let sentiment cloud your judgment? I'll not have my daughter grow up to be a quitter like the rest of your loser family. I saw red. Before I could stop myself, I stood and charged at Marlene, my hands coiled into trembling fists. You evil, miserable Hey! A booming voice froze me mid-lunge. Derek barreled into the room, grabbing me by the shoulders. What in the hell is going on here? As my son stared at me in shock and confusion, I knew I had to make him see the truth. If I didn't, Marlene's torment of Elsie would never end. I couldn't fail now, not when my granddaughter's future was at stake. Steeling my nerves, I turned to Derek and uttered the words I'd been dreading. Your wife is abusing your daughter. Derek stood frozen, his mouth agape as my accusation hung in the air like a suffocating fog. Marlene wasted no time trying to regain control of the situation. Don't listen to her ramblings, dear, she purred, slithering up to Derek with serpentine charm. You know how emotional your mother can get. She's just jealous of Elsie's talents. Jealous? I sputtered, my rage bubbling over. You twisted, delusional snake! I'm trying to protect my granddaughter from your psychotic abuse. Derek's brow furrowed in confusion as he looked from me to Marlene and back again. Abuse? What are you talking about, Mom? Open your eyes, son, I pleaded, gesturing to the disheveled, cowering form of Elsie still crumpled on the floor. Look at what your wife's training has done to that sweet child. A glimmer of clarity crept across Derek's face as he absorbed the heart-wrenching scene before him. But Marlene swiftly snuffed it out with a theatrical display of motherly affection. Sweeping over to Elsie, she scooped the quivering girl into a tight embrace. There, Pumpkin, don't listen to Grandma's scary stories. Mommy just wants what's best for her little star. Derek's jaw clenched as he warred with the conflicting realities vying for his trust. In that moment, I realized the true insidiousness of Marlene's manipulations. I had to break through at all costs. That's enough of your lies, I bellowed, startling them both. Reaching into my pocket, I revealed the sleek phone I had purposely left recording audio during our confrontation. You hear that, Derek? I have proof of the vile way your witch of a wife treats your daughter. My voice dripped with a mixture of fury and triumph as realization crept across Marlene's twisted features. You had no right, she seethed through gritted teeth. Every right, I shot back with righteous fury. As her grandmother, I'll do whatever it takes to protect Elsie from your madness. Derek stood shell-shocked as Marlene and I faced off, tremors of rage rolling off us both in palpable waves. Finally, my son found his voice. Mother, he said in a tone that brokered no argument, show me what you have on that recording. Now. My heart soared with vindication as I eagerly played back the device. Marlene's harrowing threats and insults filled the room in lurid detail as poor Elsie wept and pleaded for mercy. Derek's face drained of color as the truth burrowed into his consciousness. When the clips ended, a heavy silence blanketed us all. Nobody dared break it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Derek moved toward Marlene with grim determination. Get out, he said in a low, dangerous rumble. Marlene blinked, her mouth forming a shocked O. What? You heard me, Derek growled through gritted teeth. I want you out of this house. Tonight. I'll make arrangements for Elsie and send for your things later. But, But Derek, Marlene sputtered, her mask of regal confidence melting away as panic set in. You can't be serious. It's all a misunderstanding. Derek's face twisted into an expression of pure disgust and loathing. Save it. I'm done being blinded by your manipulations. What kind of mother terrorizes their own child like that? His words lanced deep, a killing blow to Marlene's delusional charade. She opened her mouth as if to protest further, but seemed to think better of it. With a final, hateful glare in my direction, she stormed out of the room. Elsie watched her mother's retreat with a strange, hollow look, as if awakening from a long, tumultuous dream. Derek pulled her close, cradling his daughter's fragile form while I looked on with bittersweet relief. The worst was over, or so I thought at the time, but the battle to secure Elsie's freedom had only just begun. In the days following Marlene's explosive exit, an uneasy calm settled over Derek's household. Elsie roamed the home in a daze, as if emerging from a years-long trance. Simple pleasures like playing outside or watching cartoons seemed novel concepts to her. Derek tried valiantly to make up for lost time, but his demanding job often pulled him away, leaving me to pick up the pieces and guide my wounded granddaughter back to normalcy. It wasn't easy. Years of Marlene's toxic manipulations had taken their toll, but I was determined to help Elsie rediscover the joy and freedom she deserved. Our neighbor Simon Hayes proved an unexpected ally in that mission. A kindly divorced man who lived 2 doors down, Simon had quietly observed the troubling patterns at Derek's home for years. I had my suspicions something wasn't right over there, he told me one morning as we sipped coffee on his patio. But every time I tried getting close to Elsie, that psycho wife of Derek's would chase me off like a mangy dog. I shuddered, remembering Marlene's fierce territorial instincts when it came to protecting Elsie from outside influences. Well, she's out of the picture now. For good, I hope. Simon's expression turned grave. You know it won't be that easy, right? Women like that don't just slink away quietly. His ominous words sent a chill down my spine. Before I could respond, Elsie bounded over, her face alight for the first time in ages. Grandma, Mr. Simon, can I go explore the creek today? She bounced on her toes with pent-up energy, reminding me so vividly of her joy-filled younger self. Of course, sweetie, I beamed, pulling her into a bear hug. Just be back before dinner, okay? She grinned and scampered off, grabbing a sketch pad and colored pencils on her way out. A familiar pang tugged at my heart as I watched her go. How many other childhood memories had that evil woman stolen from my grandbaby? You got lucky, you know. Simon's gruff voice pulled me from my brooding. Having proof of what that psycho was doing, I nodded soberly. Believe me, I know, which is why I'll stay vigilant until we've secured Elsie's future for good. The burly man frowned, seeming to wrestle with something on his mind. Finally, he spoke up in a low, conspiratorial tone. There's more. Things I've documented over the years. Videos, audio recordings, stuff that could really nail that witch to the wall in court if need be. I gaped at him in astonishment. Videos? Of Marlene? How? Simon's expression turned grim. Let's just say I invested in some high-tech security cameras a while back, the kind that can see and hear for blocks. He let that ominous fact linger for a beat before continuing. Look, I got the footage backed up somewhere safe. Could help make sure that snake never slithers near Elsie again. My head spun as I processed his bombshell admission. Part of me felt guilty about the prospect of weaponizing a neighbor's surveillance data against Marlene. But after the hell she'd put my family through, I quickly shoved those qualms aside. Thank you, Simon, I replied with grave sincerity. I vow to use any ammunition at my disposal to protect Elsie going forward. The man grunted and gave a resolute nod. You just say the word and I'll... Elsie! Derek's panicked bellow cut our hushed conference short. He came tearing around the hedges toward us, eyes wild and chest heaving. Marlene, she showed up out of nowhere, he sputtered, struggling to catch his breath. Grabbed Elsie and is trying to take her somewhere. What? I shot to my feet, blood draining from my face. Oh God, no. Simon was already in motion, bolting for his back door. Stay here. I'll get the van. As Derek collapsed in a heap on the patio, I felt the winds of battle whipping up once again. Marlene was far from finished, and so was my fight to save Elsie's future. By the time Simon screeched his van into Derek's driveway, I had already sprung into frantic motion. I burst through the front door, Derek hot on my heels, and began a desperate search for any signs of my missing granddaughter. "Elsie?" I called out in a strained, quavering voice. "Elsie, where are you?" No response except the faint rustle of leaves fluttering outside an open window. Fear gripped me in icy talons as visions of Marlene's twisted revenge played out in lurid detail in my mind's eye. "She came out of nowhere," Derek kept repeating in a daze, his face drained of color. "Just appeared like a ghost and grabbed Elsie before I could react." Simon brushed past us both, his jaw set in grim determination. "I'm calling the cops. She couldn't have gotten far with a kid in tow." But I knew better than to underestimate the lengths Marlene would go to hold on to her warped ambitions. My heart thundered to a staccato beat of pure rage and dread as I tore through the house, hunting any clue to where that psychotic woman had fled with my Elsie. Finally, a tiny voice reached my ears from the direction of the living room. A voice so pitiful and broken that it froze the blood in my veins. "Grandma." I wheeled around, following the sound to a closet door left ajar. Summoning every ounce of my courage, I pulled it open to find a horrific sight. Elsie, crumpled in a trembling heap, one hand bound with rope to the metal rack above, her eyes brimmed with a haunted mixture of terror and pleading as her lips formed the words again. "Grandma, help!" "Elsie!" I cried out, quickly untying the knot and scooping her frail body into my arms. "Oh, honey, what did that monster do to you?" "Mother?" She whimpered, clinging to me with desperation. She said he couldn't leave until I was perfect." My heart sank in revulsion as fitful glimpses of what Marlene had put this poor child through flashed across my mind's eye. Clutching Elsie tighter, I spun to see Derek and Simon staring at us with twin masks of horror. "We have to get out of here." I clutched Elsie fiercely to my chest. "Simon, we need to hide somewhere until the authorities get that woman." My neighbor gave a curt nod and reached for his cell phone, but before he could punch in the first digit, a malevolent voice sliced through the tension like a razor. "Oh, I don't think so, Mother." Marlene emerged from the shadows in the hallway behind us, her feral gaze boring into mine with psychotic intensity. In her hand she gripped a wicked-looking blade, its serrated edge glinting with sick menace. "One more step," she seethed in a guttural rasp. "And I swear on all that's holy, you'll never see your precious granddaughter alive again." Ice water flooded my veins as I froze to the spot, Elsie whimpering into my shoulder like a frightened mouse. Derek lunged with futile rage, but Marlene casually swatted him aside with a dismissive backhand. "Stay down, you simpering fool," she spat, her voice dripping with unbridled contempt. "This is what happens when you let bleeding heart sentiments cloud your judgment." With a deep, shuddering breath, I hugged Elsie as close as I could and faced my deranged daughter-in-law. "Whatever you want, Marlene. Please, just don't hurt her. Haven't you put her through enough torment?" Something shifted in those hateful eyes. A bitter, twisted smile split her features as she let out a grating chuckle that raised the hairs on my neck. "Torment? You think this is about torment?" Marlene's free hand clutched her chest in a pantomime of tortured anguish. This was her salvation, her one chance to claw past the curse of mediocrity that afflicts our bloodline. She took a jerking step closer, pressing the cold steel against my cheek, its razor edge biting my flesh. I held my ground, staring her down as Elsie sobbed into my neck. "I gave her the gift you were never strong enough to give Derek," Marlene hissed through gritted teeth. "The gift of my relentless drive, my burning ambition, a righteous obsession, to escape the shackles of a meaningless, forgotten existence." A solitary tear traced down her cheek as her impassioned tirade reached its crescendo. "But you had to defile that sacred commitment, didn't you? Poisoning her mind with your sickening, weak-willed compassion." She pulled the blade away and took a lurching step backwards, her whole body quivering. I watched in mute horror as the woman teetered on the edge of total madness, for my own fear rendered insignificant next to the safety of my granddaughter. In that suspended moment, Elsie lifted her head and met my gaze with luminous, imploring eyes. Without a single word, that child conveyed everything I needed to hear in that soul-rending stare. The torment, the deprivation, the shredding of all joy and hope and identity inflicted by her own mother's callous obsession. I didn't hesitate. Gathering my courage, I thrust Elsie into Derek's arms and turned to face Marlene squarely. "Get out!" The demented woman blinked, her tirade fading into sheer dumbfounded rage. "What did you say to me?" "You heard me," I bellowed, taking a bold step forward. "I want you out of my family's life once and for all. Your poison has done enough damage, you deranged witch." Marlene's mouth contorted into a hideous sneer. "The damage is only beginning, you meddling old crone." She lunged with feral abandon, swinging the blade in a vicious horizontal arc. I ducked just in time, reeling backwards as the razor-sharp edge sliced through the air where my neck had been. "Mom?" Derek launched himself at Marlene with a guttural roar, but she swatted him away like a fly. The blade planted itself into the wall as she wrestled him to the ground. "You're as pathetic as she says." Marlene spat, raining blows down on Derek's head. "Just a sad, useless shell of a man." I acted on pure instinct. Grabbing an antique globe from the end table, I wound up and swung the heavy orb squarely at the back of Marlene's skull. It connected with a sickening crunch, sending her sprawling to the side. My chest heaved with exertion as I glared down at the crumpled, barely conscious heap that had once been my daughter-in-law. "Somebody get the authorities on the line," I rasped, spitting out the words like daggers. "Before I do something we'll all regret." A dismal, haunting silence swallowed us all. The battle for Elsie's soul had reached its bloody culmination, but at what cost? When the police finally arrived, the scene must have painted a ghastly picture of domestic carnage. Derek slumped against the wall, semi-conscious and spattered with blood. Marlene bound with zip ties and muttering incoherently on the floor. And me, Lorraine Ellis, clutching my sobbing granddaughter with a vice-like grip as the madness of the past few hours finally caught up to all of us. The officers had to practically pry Elsie from my arms to assess her condition. As they loaded Marlene into the back of their cruiser like a rabid animal, she let out one final tortured howl that sent chills down my spine. "You'll all be forgotten," she screeched, writhing against her restraints. "Nameless vagrants wasting away in the gutter with the rest of the talentless nobodies." Then she was gone, like a living nightmare being hauled away. But her lingering malice hung over us all with palpable dread. What now? Where did we go from this point? Over the next few days, the fallout from Marlene's explosive unraveling rippled through our quiet community in waves. Derek resolved to take an extended leave of absence from work to be with Elsie and enter family therapy to process the trauma. Meanwhile, Marlene faced a firestorm of legal troubles. Her assault charges were compounded by allegations of child abuse and imprisonment uncovered during the investigation. The judge ultimately ruled that she should undergo mandatory psychiatric evaluation and counseling to determine the threat she posed to her own daughter. Perhaps the most shocking development was the swift and merciless backlash from our once idyllic neighborhood. Word spread like wildfire about Marlene's deranged obsession and the lengths she went to transform Elsie into a musical prodigy. Suddenly, the woman who everyone thought was just an overachieving tiger mom became persona non grata, a cautionary tale of parenthood gone horrifically wrong. People I had known for years now openly shunned me and Derek in the streets, as if the curse of Marlene's insanity might somehow rub off on us. The cruelest judgments, however, were reserved for poor Elsie. "Did you hear about the Bennett girl? What a shame, such a waste of talent. You know her mother was grooming her for Juilliard from birth? Can you imagine the pressure? No wonder the girl cracked. Apple doesn't fall far from the tree, as they say." Though they tried to shield her, the whispers and sideways glances cut Elsie deeper than any blade. The idea that her own mother's delusional ambition had somehow indelibly stained her future potential was a shadow she couldn't escape. At least not by staying in this town much longer. It was around this time that Simon, bless his ornery heart, stepped up with a proposition. His sister happened to manage a ranch in a remote part of Montana where Derek and Elsie could live off the grid for as long as they needed to heal. A chance to make a clean break and start totally anew. Though I longed for them to stay nearby, I knew it was the wisest path forward. So with a heavy heart, I began making preparations to send my loved ones off to greener pastures, far from the toxic legacy Marlene had bequeathed to us all. As I stood in the driveway hugging Elsie goodbye, I fought back hot tears. This wasn't a McKenna family tradition I ever wanted to repeat. watching the next generation flee their trauma to find hope elsewhere. But if that's what it took to free my granddaughter from the shackles of her mother's madness, then so be it. No sacrifice was too great to redeem Elsie's shattered spirit. "I love you, sweetheart," I whispered, cradling her face in my hands. Her vacant eyes glistened with a lifetime's worth of hurt and confusion. "No matter where life takes you, I'll always be here when you need me." She nodded wordlessly, shuffling toward the waiting truck. As the engine sputtered to life and they pulled away, I felt a profound sense of resolution wash over me. By sheer grit and the grace of heaven itself, I had kept my vow. Marlene's toxic reign of terror had ended. All that remained was to help Elsie rediscover the joy that had been so cruelly robbed from her childhood. With Derek and Elsie securely on their way to a fresh start in Montana, I steeled myself for the battles still to come. Though Marlene was behind bars awaiting her fate, I knew a vile woman like her wouldn't go down without an explosive fight. My prediction proved correct when Marlene's preliminary hearing kicked off a firestorm of sensationalist media coverage. Overnight, our sleepy suburb found itself thrust into the national spotlight as armchair pundits and sanctimommies engaged in a fervent public debate. This tiger mom obviously took her parenting approach too far. Are we really going to start jailing mothers for being too demanding of their children's potential? If she genuinely believed she was doing what was best for her kid, where do we draw the line between strict and psychotic? The furor reached stratospheric heights when excerpts from Marlene's psych evaluation leaked, revealing the true pathological depths of her delusions. Her obsession with transforming Elsie into a musical superstar was rooted in unresolved trauma from her own childhood. Marlene had been bred from birth as the heir to her mother's musical legacy, just another link in the chain to perpetuate a dynastic myth of artistic supremacy. But when she failed to live up to those impossible expectations, her family swiftly discarded her like so much disposable trash. For years she drifted rudderless, grasping for any sense of purpose or belonging. Then Elsie was born, and Marlene saw her chance to resurrect the crushed dreams of her own youth, to finally seize the validation and reverence that had been mercilessly denied to her. Having a child unlocked the floodgates to all her repressed psychoses. But it also amplified the warped principles seared into her psyche from an early age, namely, that perfection and greatness transcend any moral considerations of personal well-being. To Marlene, sacrificing her own child's independence and identity on the altar of achievement wasn't just acceptable, it was a sacred obligation that no casual parent could ever truly grasp. As her disturbing manifesto played out on every news channel and social media feed, the collective outrage only swelled in intensity. Suddenly, Marlene wasn't just emblematic of overbearing parental zeal run amok. She was the very embodiment of sadistic narcissism taken to its ugly extreme. No one exemplified that backlash more than Marlene's own family, the very architects of her childhood torment. In a bombshell interview, her estranged father stepped forward to denounce his daughter's unforgivable atrocities. His words were as chilling as they were damning. "We gave Marlene every opportunity for greatness. Tutors, training camps, the finest facilities, anything to cultivate the talent she proved deficient in harnessing. When she failed us despite those privileges, we were forced to cut her loose in disgrace. How she's chosen to inflict that same misery upon an innocent child only proves she learned nothing from the mistakes of her coddled upbringing." In a dark twist of symmetry, Marlene now found herself utterly disowned by the vicious legacy she had so desperately craved. Her ambitions atomized in the face of a jury's unsparing judgment. Guilty. Guilty on charges of child abuse, false imprisonment, and criminal endangerment. The prosecutor's summation cast Marlene as a raving Medea, willing to commit unspeakable atrocities to satisfy her delusional hunger for vicarious glory. As the guilty verdict was read, I couldn't help but feel a pang of pity for the broken, hollowed-out soul shuddering before the bench. In that moment, Marlene Bennett ceased being a monster and simply became pathetic, a sad mirror of how far wounded pride and self-deception can twist the human spirit. The judge showed no such leniency. After scathing federal prosecutors demanded the maximum sentence, Marlene was remanded to a secure psychiatric facility for the next 10 to 20 years. pending mandatory therapy and observation to determine if she still posed a threat to herself and others once her debt to society was paid. It was a fate worse than any conventional prison could inflict. Marlene would be chemically neutered, cauterized of any agency to stoke her warped aspirations of glory, left to rot in an anonymous limbo, drained of the delirious fuel that allowed her grandiose sense of purpose to metastasize in the first place. Yet as the disgraced woman was led away in shackles, her final act shocked even me. Straining against the grip of her escorting officers, Marlene locked her wild eyes onto mine from across the courtroom gallery. "This isn't over, you smug old harpy," she shrieked with unhinged fury. "Your family will be forgotten in mediocrity and failure just like mine. Mark my words." The outburst earned her a sharp blow to the gut that doubled her over. But even then, her hateful glare remained locked onto me with unsettling intensity, as if issuing an unspoken curse that no prison could ever contain. I had won this battle, saved Elsie from her mother's noxious grip. But at what cost? Though Marlene was in custody, the scars of her abuse would take years to heal, perhaps even spanning generations. With a weary sigh and a heavy heart, I left the carnage of the courtroom behind and set my sights forward. My family's road to recovery was just beginning, after all. The following months passed by in a disorienting whirlwind. With Marlene locked away and Derek dedicated to rebuilding his life with Elsie out west, I was left to pick up the scattered pieces of our shattered existence back home. It wasn't easy. Despite the urban legends that now swirled about the horrors that unfolded under my own roof, the fact remained that most folks still saw me as the well-meaning oldster whose granddaughter was simply collateral damage to her mother's insanity. In other words, pity mixed with more than a hint of disdainful gossip became the brand our family wore like a scarlet letter around town. Grocery clerks who had known me for decades suddenly went cold and aloof. Neighbors stopped waving from across the street. Even Simon retreated behind the isolating walls of his run-down bachelor pad. I understood their reticence, of course. Proximity to the macabre incidents of Marlene's unmaking had become radioactive by association. Still, the loneliness haunted my daily existence like a lingering malaise, with my only haven coming from the occasional phone call giving meager updates on Elsie and Derek's progress out in Montana. "She still won't utter a single word," Derek confided during one such heart-wrenching chat. "Hasn't drawn anything or even cracked a smile since we arrived. It's like part of her soul remains trapped back in that house of horrors." My heart ached for the burdens those two carried, even separated from the source of their strife. I vowed to help them both keep putting one foot in front of the other, no matter how treacherous the path ahead might seem. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, some 6 months after their departure, an unexpected miracle arrived at my doorstep. It was a plain manila envelope unstamped, likely hand-delivered by a local mail carrier. My name scrawled across the front in childlike penmanship that instantly made my heart skip a beat. Elsie. With trembling hands, I tore open the clasp and upended the contents onto my kitchen counter. What spilled out was a drawing. A meticulously detailed pencil sketch of a young woman with sunken eyes, hollowed cheeks, and a beatific smile tugging at the edges of her lips. At first glance, I didn't recognize the gaunt, haunted visage staring back at me from the page. But as my eyes roamed the delicate strokes of graphite that composed her wispy brown hair, the faded floral print of her frayed house dress, a sob hitched in my throat. It was me. My own weary face rendered with soul-lancing tenderness and empathy through the prism of Elsie's wounded psyche. Fresh tears sprang anew when I finally registered the tiny words etched into the bottom corner of the picture. My savior. That was the spark I needed to energize me back into productive motion for the first time in months. If this heartfelt gesture was any indication, then Elsie's once vibrant spirit was finally stirring back to life out there on that distant ranch. That very night, I sprang into a whirlwind of activity arranging travel plans and logistics for an extended trip to visit them both over the winter holidays. No more fragmentary phone calls or letters would suffice to track my granddaughter's step-by-step recovery. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to hold her renewed joy in my arms. The weeks blurred together like frames of an old home movie reel as my departure date steadily approached. Before I knew it, I stood bundled on the windswept front porch, suitcase in hand, and greeted by the grinning, rosy-cheeked face of Simon. "You didn't think I was going to let you make that whole trek alone, did ya?" The gruff loner smiled from beneath his faded cap before nodding toward the battered Ford idling at the curb. "Now come on. Nothing but wide-open road between here and there." My heart swelled with profound gratitude for my newfound friend's enduring devotion. After exchanging a teary hug, I hurried to join him for the long journey toward healing and rebirth. Glancing back at the battered facade of the house one final time, I felt the shadows of old torments recede like a long, fitful nightmare, finally slipping away. Though formidable challenges still lay ahead, the glimmer of hope that Elsie had rediscovered her fighting spirit was the balm I needed to carry on. No matter how long it took, no matter what hurdles arose, I would be there for her restoration. The guardian she needed to guide her back into the warm light of joy and self-discovery. This time, permanently freed from the shackles of her mother's poisonous ambition. With Simon's van, now bound for the winding roads of deliverance, I allowed my spirit to soar ahead with the winds of optimism and renewal. My mission had reached its apex, and the rays of a new dawn beckoned on the horizon. Elsie's torment was over. At long last, the cycle was broken. "You cheated on me!" Declan's enraged words pierced the air like shrapnel, shredding the fabric of our once blissful family life. I recoiled, my mind spinning as I struggled to process the vicious accusation. "What are you talking about? I would never betray you," I cried out, my voice trembling with disbelief. Declan thrust a medical report in my face, his eyes blazing with hurt and betrayal. "Then how do you explain this? Lila's blood type proves she can't be my daughter." My heart plummeted as I scanned the document, the stark reality of the incompatible blood types undeniable. Confusion swirled within me, kaleidoscopic shards of doubt and denial whirling in my mind. "There must be a mistake," I pleaded, grasping at any shred of rationality. "We need to get a second opinion or run more tests." "More tests?" Declan scoffed, his face twisted with contempt. "So you can fabricate more lies? I don't know what pathetic games you're playing, but I want you and that bastard child out of my house tonight." The venom in his words stung like acid, searing through the very fiber of my being. I opened my mouth to protest, but my throat constricted, robbing me of speech. How could the man I loved, the father of my child, hurl such vicious insults with such callous ease? Lila's muffled sobs drifted from her bedroom, a heartbreaking counterpoint to the maelstrom engulfing our home. Mustering every ounce of composure, I turned and went to her, cradling her tiny form as she clung to me, her tears soaking my blouse. "Mommy, why is Daddy so mad?" she whimpered, her innocent eyes brimming with fear and confusion. I stroked her hair, my own tears flowing freely now. "It's going to be okay, baby. Mommy's here," I whispered, the hollow reassurance tasting bitter on my tongue. The front door slammed, signaling Declan's departure. His mother, Eloise, regarded me with undisguised contempt, her judgmental stare searing into my soul. "I always knew you were trash," she spat, her words laced with venom. "God knows what other depraved secrets you're hiding." As she stormed out, I sank to the floor, cradling Lila in my arms, her tiny body racked with sobs. The walls seemed to close in around us, the once warm sanctuary of our home now a suffocating prison of shattered trust and broken dreams. That night, as I lay awake in the darkness, my mind replayed the horrors of the day in an endless, torturous loop. Declan's accusations, Eloise's scathing condemnation, they burrowed into my psyche like parasitic worms, gnawing at my sanity, my self-worth eroding with every agonizing second. Yet, amid the maelstrom of despair, a flicker of defiance ignited within me. I was innocent, and no matter how insurmountable the odds, I would fight to prove it. For Lila's sake and for my own, I would not surrender to the shadows of doubt. As the first tentative rays of dawn seeped through the curtains, I rose from the bed, my resolution steeled. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, unbowed and unbroken. This was not the end. It was merely the beginning of a hard-fought battle for truth, justice, and redemption. The next few days blurred into a waking nightmare. Declan's rage had not subsided, his accusations growing more venomous with each passing hour. Eloise fanned the flames, her hateful whispers poisoning his mind against me. "You'll never see that child again," Declan snarled, his face contorted with rage. Not until you admit to your sordid betrayal. I pleaded, reasoned, and begged, but my words fell on deaf ears. In their eyes, I was the embodiment of sin, a deceitful serpent who had violated the sanctity of our marriage. One evening, as I was preparing Lila's dinner, Declan stormed into the kitchen, his eyes wild with fury. "Pack your things," he spat. "You and that bastard are leaving tonight." Reeling from the impact of his words, I clutched Lila protectively. "You can't do this, Declan. She's your daughter, for God's sake." His cruel laughter pierced the air, chilling me to the core. "My daughter? Don't make me laugh. That little brat is a constant reminder of your infidelity," Lila whimpered, burying her face in my embrace as Eloise glowered from the doorway. "You heard him, whore. Get out before we call the police." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I gathered our meager belongings, the weight of our shattered lives condensed into 2 battered suitcases. Lila clung to me, her tiny frame racked with sobs, her innocence shattered by the vitriol that surrounded us. As we stepped out into the night, the cold air stung my face, a harsh reminder of the cruel world that awaited us. Eloise's parting words sliced through the silence like a razor. "Don't ever show your face here again, you lying tramp." In the days that followed, we drifted from shelter to shelter, our once comfortable existence reduced to a daily struggle for survival. I reached out to Tara, my former colleague and confidant, who embraced us with open arms. "You're not alone in this, Mari," she vowed, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I'll help you get back on your feet." True to her word, Tara secured us a modest apartment and arranged for me to interview at her marketing firm. As I sat across from the stern-faced interviewer, my heart raced with trepidation. "So, Mrs. Turner," he drawled, his gaze piercing, "care to explain this gap in your employment history?" I swallowed hard, bracing myself for the inevitable judgment. "My husband falsely accused me of infidelity and threw us out. I've been fighting to clear my name ever since." His eyebrows arched, and for a moment I feared the worst. But then, to my surprise, he nodded slowly. "I've seen my fair share of bitter divorces," he sighed. "Welcome to the team, Marielle. We could use a fighter like you." As I stepped out into the crisp morning air, a glimmer of hope flickered within me. Tara's unwavering support and the promise of a fresh start had reignited the flames of determination. I would not be cowed by Declan's vile accusations or the harsh realities that now defined our existence. No, this was not the end. It was merely the first salvo in a war for justice, dignity, and the reclamation of our lives. And I would emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of adjustment and determination. Tara's steadfast friendship and the camaraderie of my new colleagues provided a much-needed anchor amidst the turbulence that had consumed my life. Yet, the shadow of Declan's accusations lingered, a constant specter that haunted my every waking moment. I knew that to reclaim my dignity and secure Lila's future, I needed more than moral support. I needed a legal strategy. "You're not alone in this fight," Tara assured me one evening over coffee. "I know someone who can help." A few days later, I found myself seated across from Vincent, a family lawyer whose reputation for tenacity preceded him. "Let's cut to the chase," he began, his gaze unwavering. "Declan's accusations are baseless, but proving paternity won't be easy." I nodded, steeling myself for the challenges ahead. "We'll need to demand a proper genetic test," Vincent continued, "and dig into Declan's background. Any skeletons in his closet could bolster your case." As the weeks progressed, I threw myself into the twin pursuits of work and legal preparations. Lila's well-being was my driving force, a beacon that guided me through the darkest moments. "Mommy, when are we going home?" she would ask, her innocent eyes brimming with confusion. "Soon, baby," I'd reassure her, fighting back the tears that threatened to spill. "Mommy's working on it." At the office, I poured my heart into every project, determined to prove my worth and silence the whispers that still lingered. Yet, not everyone was supportive. "Heard you're quite the little homewrecker," one colleague sneered during a team meeting. "Bet you're loving all the attention, you slut." The words sliced through me like razor blades, reopening wounds that had barely begun to heal. As tears blurred my vision, a firm hand gripped my shoulder. "That's enough, Carl." Tara's voice cut through the tension like a whip. "Unless you want a harassment suit on your hands, I suggest you keep your vile thoughts to yourself. In that moment, I realized the true depth of Tara's loyalty. A wellspring of strength that would sustain me through the darkest valleys that lay ahead. As the weeks bled into months, Vincent's investigations began to bear fruit. Financial records, travel receipts, and witness testimonies painted a damning portrait of Declan's activities, one that suggested his accusations were merely a smokescreen for his own indiscretions. "We've got him," Vincent declared, a predatory gleam in his eye. "It's time to take the fight to Declan and bury him under the weight of his own lies." A renewed sense of purpose coursed through my veins. No longer was I the victim, cowering in the shadows of doubt. I was a warrior, armed with the truth and fueled by a mother's love, a force to be reckoned with in the battle for justice and redemption. As I gazed into Lila's eyes that night, I made a silent vow. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifices, I would emerge victorious. For her sake, and for the sake of every woman who had been wronged by the cruelty of men, I would not rest until the scales of justice were balanced once more. The deeper we delved into Declan's past, the more sordid revelations came to light. What had initially seemed like a straightforward case of mistaken paternity quickly spiraled into a labyrinth of lies and deceit. "Look at this," Vincent growled one evening, slamming a stack of financial records onto the table. "Unexplained cash withdrawals, luxury hotel charges. The paper trail points to something much darker than a simple affair." I pored over the documents, my stomach churning with each damning entry. The man I had once loved, the father of my child, was rapidly transforming into a stranger, a devious manipulator capable of unimaginable betrayal. "We need to dig deeper," I replied, my voice steely with determination. "No stone can be left unturned." In the weeks that followed, we assembled a mosaic of evidence, a tapestry woven from surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and digital footprints. The picture that emerged was one of a man consumed by greed, lust, and an insatiable appetite for deception. "He's been playing us all for fools," Vincent seethed, his fists clenched. The blood-type discrepancy was just a convenient cover for his own sordid affairs. My mind reeled as the truth unraveled, each revelation more gut-wrenching than the last. Declan's protestations of fidelity had been a carefully constructed facade, concealing a web of lies that stretched back years. "That bastard," I hissed, my fingers digging into the armrests. "All this time, he's been the one betraying us." Yet, amidst the maelstrom of anger and disillusionment, a glimmer of hope emerged. With the truth laid bare, we possessed the ammunition to dismantle Declan's house of cards, to strip away the veneer of righteousness and expose him for the duplicitous charlatan he truly was. "We're going to bury him," Vincent vowed, a predatory gleam in his eye. "He'll wish he never crossed paths with us." As the days ticked by, our case grew stronger, bolstered by irrefutable evidence and sworn testimonies. Declan's web of lies was unraveling, strand by damning strand, leaving him vulnerable and exposed. One evening, as I tucked Lila into bed, her innocent eyes brimmed with curiosity. "Mommy, why are you and Daddy fighting?" I swallowed hard, struggling to find the words to explain the betrayal that had shattered our lives. "Daddy did some very bad things," I began, choosing my words carefully. "But don't worry, sweetie, Mommy's going to make things right." Her small hand caressed my cheek, her touch a balm for the rawness that still lingered. "I love you, Mommy," she whispered, her voice laced with a wisdom far beyond her years. In that moment, I knew that no matter the obstacles, no matter the sacrifices, I would emerge victorious. For Lila's sake, and for the sake of every woman who had been wronged by the cruelty of men, I would not rest until justice was served. As I rose from her bedside, a renewed sense of purpose coursed through my veins. The time for tears and self-pity was over. Now was the moment to strike, to unleash the full force of our righteous fury upon the man who had so callously shattered our lives. Declan's reign of deception was nearing its end, and I would be the one to deliver the final devastating blow that would bring him to his knees. Justice, long denied, would finally be served. The weight of the evidence against Declan was staggering, a damning mosaic of lies and infidelity that threatened to unravel the very foundation of his carefully constructed charade. Yet, as the day of reckoning approached, a sense of trepidation gnawed at the edges of my resolve. "He's not going to go down without a fight," Vincent warned, his brow furrowed with concern. Declan's got deep pockets and a nasty vindictive streak. Brace yourself for an all-out assault. His words proved prophetic. In the days leading up to the hearing, a torrent of allegations and character assassinations flooded the media, each more vicious than the last. Sources close to the family described Marielle Turner as an unfit mother with a history of promiscuity and substance abuse. One lurid headline screamed. I recoiled in disgust, my hands trembling, as I read the litany of falsehoods and half-truths that had been woven into a nightmarish tapestry of lies. Don't let it get to you, Tara urged, her voice a steadying force amidst the storm. They're just trying to rattle you. Yet, as the days ticked by, the onslaught intensified, each salvo more devastating than the last. Strangers would hurl insults as I passed on the street, their words cutting deeper than any knife. Whore! Baby killer! Declan was too good for trash like you. The venom seeped into my pores, poisoning my mind with doubt and self-loathing. There were moments when the thought of surrender, of simply retreating into the shadows and letting Declan claim his hollow victory, seemed like a merciful release. But then, I would look into Lila's eyes, those pools of innocence that had been forever tainted by the cruelty of the world, and my resolve would harden once more. I won't let him win, baby, cradling her against me. Mommy's going to make everything right again. The night before the hearing, as I lay awake in the silence of our modest apartment, a sense of clarity washed over me. This was more than just a battle for custody or vindication. It was a war, a clash of ideologies that would reverberate far beyond the confines of our fractured lives. Declan embodied the worst aspects of patriarchal arrogance, the belief that wealth and status granted him the right to lie, cheat, and discard those who dared to challenge his authority. His actions were a poisonous manifestation of the toxic masculinity that had subjugated women for centuries, reducing us to mere chattels to be used and discarded at a man's whim. But I was the embodiment of a new order, a defiant spirit that refused to be cowed or silenced. In that moment, I understood that my battle transcended the personal. It was a clarion call for every woman who had been wronged, a beacon of hope that justice could prevail even in the darkest of times. As the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains, I rose from the bed, my eyes burning with resolve. The time for doubt and self-pity was over. The hour of reckoning had arrived. With Lila's hand clasped tightly in mine, I stepped out into the world, ready to face the storm that awaited us. Declan's reign of terror was about to end, and I would be the one to deliver the killing blow that would topple his empire of lies. This was more than just a courtroom battle. It was a war for the very soul of our society, a fight to exorcise the demons of misogyny and oppression that had festered for far too long. And I, armed with the truth and fueled by a mother's love, would be the avenging angel that rained judgment upon those who dared to subjugate and abuse. The time for justice had come, and I would not rest until the scales were balanced once more. The air in the courtroom was thick with tension, each side bristling with barely contained hostility. Declan, impeccably groomed and flanked by his high-priced legal team, glowered at me from across the aisle, his eyes burning with contempt. As the proceedings commenced, his lawyers launched into a blistering assault, painting me as a morally bankrupt adulteress unfit for motherhood. Their words lashed like whips, each allegation more sordid than the last. Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming, the lead counsel sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Mrs. Turner's promiscuity and utter disregard for the sanctity of marriage have irreparably damaged this family. I steeled myself, my fingers digging into the armrests as a tidal wave of rage threatened to consume me. But then Vincent rose to his feet, his eyes glinting with a predatory gleam. Your Honor, the defense's claims are nothing more than a smokescreen, a desperate attempt to conceal the truth about Mr. Turner's own egregious transgressions. With a deft flick of his wrist, he produced a sheaf of documents, slamming them onto the evidence table with a resounding thud. Financial records, travel receipts, surveillance footage, all pointing to a sordid web of infidelity and deceit that stretches back years. A hush fell over the courtroom as the damning evidence was presented, each piece fitting together like a macabre jigsaw puzzle. Declan's face drained of color, his carefully cultivated veneer of respectability crumbling with each revelation. "You lying sack of filth," I hissed, my voice trembling with fury. "All this time, you've been the one cheating. The blood type was just a convenient excuse to cover your own tracks." Declan recoiled as if struck, his eyes darting frantically from face to face, searching for an ally in the sea of condemnation that surrounded him. I can explain," he sputtered, his composure cracking under the weight of the evidence. "Save your pathetic excuses," Vincent snarled, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The truth is laid bare for all to see. You're nothing but a spineless coward who hid behind false accusations to mask your own sins." As the revelations continued to unfold, each more damning than the last, the courtroom descended into pandemonium. Eloise, her face contorted in a rictus of disbelief and horror, turned on her son with a fury that would have cowed lesser men. "How could you?" she raged, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "You've disgraced our family, brought shame upon us all with your lies and debauchery." Declan shrank back, his bravado evaporating in the face of his mother's wrath. In that moment, he was no longer the swaggering titan who had so callously shattered our lives. He was a small, pitiful creature, exposed and vulnerable to the judgment of his peers. As the gavel thundered, restoring order to the courtroom, a hush fell over the proceedings. All eyes turned towards the judge, whose weathered face betrayed a lifetime of bearing witness to the depths of human depravity. "In light of the overwhelming evidence presented," he intoned, his voice grave, "I have no choice but to rule in favor of Mrs. Turner. Full custody of the child, as well as a substantial settlement, will be awarded forthwith." A weight lifted from my shoulders, a burden that had pressed down upon me for far too long. As Declan was led away, his head bowed in shame, I turned to face the woman who had once been my mother-in-law. Eloise regarded me with a mixture of contrition and begrudging respect, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I was wrong about you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." In that moment, I felt a pang of pity for the broken woman before me, a victim of her own toxic loyalty, blinded by her adoration for a son who had proven himself unworthy of such devotion. Extending my hand, I met her gaze with a steely resolve that brooked no argument. "Let's put the past behind us," I replied, my voice unwavering, "for Leela's sake." As our fingers intertwined, a bridge across the chasm of pain and betrayal, I knew that a new chapter was beginning. One forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the indomitable strength of a mother's love. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. There would be other Declans, other malignant forces bent on subjugating and oppressing those they deemed inferior. But I would be ready, a warrior armed with the truth and fueled by an unquenchable thirst for justice. No longer would I cower in the shadows, cowering from the stinging lash of misogyny and cruelty. No, from this day forward, I would stand tall and defiant, a beacon of hope for all those who had been wronged, a living embodiment of the indomitable spirit that refused to be broken. The reckoning had come, and I had emerged victorious, battered, perhaps, but unbroken and emboldened for the battles yet to come. In the aftermath of the courtroom battle, a surreal calm settled over our lives. Declan, disgraced and humiliated, had retreated into the shadows, his once formidable presence reduced to a mere specter haunting the fringes of our existence. The financial settlement, though substantial, felt like a hollow victory, a paltry compensation for the anguish and betrayal we had endured. Yet, as the dust settled and the harsh glare of public scrutiny faded, a new reality began to take shape. Eloise, her carefully constructed worldview shattered by the revelations of her son's duplicity, found herself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Gone was the imperious matriarch who had once so vehemently condemned me. In her place stood a shell of a woman, haunted by the ghosts of her own misjudgments. "I owe you an apology," she murmured one afternoon as we sat across from each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. I regarded her with a guarded expression, the wounds of her past transgressions still raw and throbbing. "For too long, I allowed my own prejudices to blind me to the truth," she continued, her voice tinged with regret. "I failed you, and more importantly, I failed Lila." A part of me yearned to unleash the torrent of pent-up fury that had festered for so long, to lash out and inflict upon her a fraction of the pain she had so callously inflicted upon us. But as I gazed into her haunted eyes, I saw not the imperious shrew who had once reveled in our suffering, but a broken woman, a victim of her own misguided loyalties and toxic ideologies. In that moment, a profound truth crystallized within me. Harboring hatred and resentment would only perpetuate the cycle of pain and oppression that had nearly destroyed us. "We've all made mistakes," I replied, my voice measured and even. "What matters now is how we move forward, as a family, for Lila's sake." Eloise's shoulders sagged, a tremulous sigh escaping her lips as a flicker of relief passed across her features. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You've shown more grace and compassion than I ever deserved." As the weeks bled into months, a fragile truce took root between us. The path towards true reconciliation would be long and arduous, paved with the shattered remnants of our fractured trust. Yet, for Lila's sake, we persevered. Two warriors, battle-scarred and weary, united by a shared commitment to forge a better future for the innocent caught in the crossfire of our conflict. Slowly, tentatively, the walls began to crumble, and glimmers of the family we had once been started to emerge from the rubble of our shattered lives. Lila, ever resilient, took the first steps towards healing the breach, her boundless love and infectious laughter serving as a balm for the wounds that still lingered. "Grandma, come play with us," she would call out, her eyes sparkling with unbridled joy. And Eloise, her defenses worn down by the relentless onslaught of childish innocence, would inevitably acquiesce, setting aside her trepidation and embracing the moment with a cautious tenderness. In those stolen moments, I caught fleeting glimpses of the woman she might have been. A loving matriarch, untainted by the corrosive influence of prejudice and toxic masculinity. As for Declan, his presence lingered like a malignant shadow, a constant reminder of the depths of betrayal we had endured. Yet with each passing day, his hold over us weakened, his once formidable aura of invincibility eroded by the unstoppable march of time and truth. We were survivors, battle-hardened and emboldened by the fires of adversity. The chains of oppression that had once bound us lay shattered at our feet, the shackles of fear and self-doubt cast aside in favor of a newfound strength and resilience. And as I gazed out upon the world that had once seemed so hostile and unforgiving, I felt a surge of hope swell within me, a beacon of promise that illuminated the path ahead. The war had been won, but the battle for true equality and justice was far from over. There would be other Declans, other malignant forces bent on subjugating and oppressing those they deemed inferior. But we would be ready, a united front forged in the crucible of suffering and tempered by the indomitable strength of a mother's love. No longer would we cower in the shadows, cowering from the stinging lash of misogyny and cruelty. No, from this day forward, we would stand tall and defiant, beacons of hope for all those who had been wronged. Living embodiments of the indomitable spirit that refused to be broken, the reckoning had come, and we had emerged victorious. Battered, perhaps, but unbroken and emboldened for the battles yet to come. The weight of the past year's tumultuous events seemed to dissipate as I stepped across the threshold of our new home, a cozy two-story nestled in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. This was more than just a fresh start. It was a physical embodiment of the hard-won victories that had carried us to this point. "What do you think, baby?" I asked, turning to Lila with a warm smile. Her eyes danced with unbridled delight as she took in the spacious surroundings, her tiny feet pattering across the hardwood floors. "I love it, Mommy," she exclaimed, twirling in a whirlwind of giddy excitement. Watching her, I felt a surge of pride and gratitude wash over me. This was the life she deserved. A sanctuary untainted by the specter of Declan's betrayal, a place where she could blossom and thrive without the weight of our past struggles bearing down upon her. "I'm glad you approve," I chuckled, ruffling her hair affectionately. As the days melted into weeks, our new abode began to take on the warmth and character of a true home. Lila's vibrant artwork adorned the walls, splashes of color and whimsy that seemed to radiate a childlike joy. Yet, amidst the trappings of our fresh start, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of melancholy. The road that had led us here had been paved with pain and heartache, a crucible of suffering that had forged us into the warriors we had become. "You've come a long way, Mari," Tara murmured one evening as we sipped wine on the back patio, basking in the golden glow of the setting sun. I nodded, my gaze drifting to the horizon as memories of our shared struggles played out like a bittersweet symphony. "There were times when I didn't think I'd make it," I admitted, my voice tinged with a hard-won wisdom. "But you were there, every step of the way. I can never repay you for that." Tara's eyes shone with a mixture of pride and affection as she reached across the table, her hand enveloping mine in a warm, reassuring embrace. "You don't have to," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Seeing you rise from the ashes, stronger and more resilient than ever, that's all the reward I could ever want." As the weeks bled into months, I found myself rediscovering the passions and ambitions that had once defined me. With Lila's future secured and the specter of Declan's betrayal fading into a distant memory, I turned my sights towards the next chapter of my life. The marketing firm welcomed me back with open arms, and I threw myself into my work with a renewed vigor, channeling the hard-won lessons of my ordeal into a driving force that propelled me ever forward. "You've got fire in your belly, Turner," my boss remarked one day, a glint of admiration in his eye. "Keep this up, and you'll be running the show before you know it." As I climbed the corporate ladder, each rung a testament to my tenacity and resilience. A part of me couldn't help but revel in the delicious irony of it all. The very traits that Declan had sought to crush and subjugate, my strength, my independence, my unwavering spirit, were now the cornerstones of my success. Yet for all my professional triumphs, it was the quiet moments with Lila that truly brought me solace and fulfillment. Watching her blossom into a confident, vibrant young woman filled me with an indescribable sense of pride and wonder. "You're my hero, Mommy," she would whisper, her eyes brimming with adoration as she snuggled against me on the couch, our nightly ritual of story time and cuddles unfolding like a cherished tradition. In those moments, I felt a profound connection to the unbroken chain of strong, resilient women who had come before me, warriors who had fought and bled to carve out a space in a world that had sought to diminish and subjugate them. And as I gazed into Lila's innocent face, I silently vowed to honor their legacy, to be the embodiment of the unwavering spirit that refused to be cowed or broken. The years melted away, each one marked by triumphs and challenges, laughter and tears, the ebb and flow of life's rich tapestry. Yet, through it all, one constant remained, the bond between mother and daughter, forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by an unbreakable love. As the twilight of my life began to cast its gentle glow, I found myself reflecting on the winding path that had brought me to this point. The struggles, the heartache, the hard-won battles, they had all been necessary steps on a journey that had tested the very limits of my strength and resilience. And as I looked out upon the world, I saw not just the scars of my own trials, but the countless other women who had faced their own battles, their own Declans to conquer. In that moment, I knew that my story was more than just a personal triumph. It was a rallying cry, a beacon of hope for all those who had been wronged, oppressed, and subjugated. For in the end, it was not the weight of our burdens that defined us, but the indomitable spirit that refused to be crushed beneath them. We were warriors, forged in the crucible of adversity, our scars a testament to the battles we had waged and the victories we had won. And as I took my final breath, secure in the knowledge that my legacy would live on through Lila and the generations to come, I felt a sense of profound peace wash over me. The war was won, the battles had been fought, and in the end, justice and resilience had prevailed. We were the unbroken, the unbowed, and our stories would echo through the ages as a reminder of the indomitable strength of the human spirit. The Austin Convention Center was a spectacle of glitz and glamour tonight for TechCon, the premier technology event of the year. I smoothed my deep burgundy cocktail dress as I waited for Derek to join me after mingling with investors. My husband had been actively pitching his new enterprise data security firm, CipherShield, to venture capitalists here. Across the crowded hall, I spotted Derek engaged in an intense discussion with Cassidy Wells, one of his employees. I knew Derek placed a lot of trust in the young software developer, but her body language seemed overly familiar. She stood entirely too close, practically whispering in his ear, with her fingers lingering on his forearm. A knot twisted in my stomach. Needing some air, I made my way through the crowd toward the open-air balcony. As I passed by them, Cassidy's words made me freeze in my tracks. "I hate having to sneak around like this," she murmured in a hushed tone. Derek glanced around furtively before responding in a low voice. "It's just until I can clean up this mess with Amelia." My heart pounded as his meaning washed over me in waves of disbelief and sickening realization. I stumbled outside, struggling to catch my breath. The cool night air provided little relief. "Hey, you okay?" A familiar voice broke through my daze. Vincent stood beside me, his thick-rimmed glasses illuminated by the glowing city skyline. "I think Derek is cheating on me." I managed to choke out the words, feeling them rip through my chest. Vince pulled me into a tight embrace. I'm so sorry. What happened?" Steadying myself, I recounted the exchange I'd overheard between Derek and Cassidy. Vince's face contorted with anger as the gravity of the situation sank in. "That bastard! After everything you've sacrificed to support his career?" His voice dripped with disdain. "We need to gather evidence and bring that slimeball down." I nodded, fists clenched with determination. Derek's deceit had shattered my world, but I refused to be a victim. If he thought I would go down without a fight, he was gravely mistaken. My mind raced as I formulated the first steps of my plan. "Vince, I need you to dig up whatever you can on Cassidy and any financial discrepancies at Cypher Shield. There's no way he could sustain an affair and keep that startup afloat legitimately." "Consider it done," Vince affirmed resolutely. "I've got contacts that can access all sorts of records. We'll make that lying sack of—" "Amelia?" Derek's voice cut through our hushed conversation. "There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." I spun around, anger flaring as I met the concerned gaze of the man I once trusted completely. Keeping my expression neutral, I willed myself to remain composed as deception after deception flashed through my mind. "Sorry, I just needed some air," I replied flatly. "Shall we head home? I'm feeling a bit under the weather." "Of course, baby." Derek gave my arm a reassuring squeeze as we said our goodbyes to Vince and made our way to the valet. The ride home was thick with leaden silence. I stared vacantly out the window, fear and fury churning within me. Tonight's unveiling had set in motion a series of events that would ultimately unravel Derek's web of lies. He had shattered the loving oath we had taken, violated the sanctity of our marriage. For that, he would face the consequences. It was only a matter of time before the truth came crashing down upon him. And when it did, I would be ready to embrace my newfound freedom by letting the scales of justice solely in my favor. Over the following weeks, I kept a calculated distance from Derek, my affections turned to icy indifference. Meanwhile, Vince worked tirelessly to unearth any digital trail of Derek's misdeeds. I combed through months of credit card statements, Vince updated me one evening at his apartment. Lots of expensive dinners, hotel rooms, you name it, all the hallmarks of a tawdry affair. I clenched my jaw, sickened but unsurprised by the details of Derek's revolting dalliance with that cheap office slut. Vince's eyes narrowed. But that's not the worst of it. I found some major financial discrepancies at Cypher Shield, too. Like what? I leaned forward, my anger simmering. Well, for starters, it seems like Derek has been shunting investor money into unauthorized accounts under his control, Vince began, scrolling through documents on his laptop. There's also questionable accounting regarding payroll expenditures and taxes. That lying, cheating bastard, I erupted, fire coursing through me. He used my salary from Terrasis to help fund that startup scam. The sheer breadth of Derek's deception knew no bounds. While I poured my life into my software engineering role to make ends meet, he had been squandering our money on illicit thrills and shady dealings. Just then, the doorbell rang. Vince reflexively tensed before rising to answer it. I heard muffled voices before Derek's unmistakable timbre boomed from the entryway. "Where the hell is my wife?" I froze as he barged into the living room, incredulous fury etched across his face. "What kind of twisted games are you playing at?" He advanced on me, remorseless entitlement radiating from his towering frame. "You've been avoiding me for weeks and hanging around with this loser. Everything I've done is to provide for our future." In one charged motion, Derek swatted the laptop off the coffee table, sending it clattering to the floor. "We're going home right now." Something inside me snapped at his show of dominance. Years of suppressed anguish and rage detonated in an explosive torrent. "How dare you?" I shot daggers at my soon-to-be ex-husband. "You've been cheating on me with that simpering whore Cassidy, blowing millions of dollars on your twisted fantasies while I worked myself to the bone." Derek's expression flashed from fury to fear as I unleashed the full, scorching brunt of my disgust. "We're through, Derek. I refuse to be married to such a deceitful, morally bankrupt cretin. The days of your lies and betrayal are over." His jaw went slack as I punctuated the tirade by violently whipping off my wedding band, clattering it against the wall. Derek recoiled, any trace of smug control evaporating from his bullying facade. "You're making a huge mistake, Amelia," he stammered, voice quivering. "Nobody will believe your insane accusations. I'll bury you with my wealth and influence if you try to ruin me." I matched his glare with seething determination. "I have no doubt your ludicrous spending and dodgy finances will bury you quite nicely without any help from me." With that, I stormed out, leaving a shell-shocked Derek gaping in the wake of his life's implosion. The first phase was complete. I'd irrevocably severed our ties and exposed his moral void, but this was merely the opening salvo. Derek's reckoning was long overdue, and I would be the catalyst to dismantle his life as he knew it, just as he had so brutally disassembled mine. In the days following my explosive confrontation with Derek, I felt an odd sense of calm amidst the swirling turmoil. I had shattered the facade of our sham marriage and reclaimed my dignity. Now it was time to pivot to the next phase, dismantling his life completely. Vince proved to be an invaluable ally, his ruthless efficiency in gathering intel matched only by his outrage at Derek's treachery. One evening, he arrived at my apartment looking grim. "I have the nail for Derek's coffin," he stated, dropping a weighty manila folder on my kitchen counter. "This is a logged record of every call, text, and email between him and his little mistress." I leafed through the documents, bile rising at the sheer volume of lurid communications. Explicit photos, arrived erotic messages, hotel reservations, all conclusive proof that Derek's affair had been raging for months under my oblivious nose. "There's more," Vince continued grimly. "It seems our dear husband wasn't quite as discreet in covering his financial tracks at Cipher Shield. He produced a raft of spreadsheets detailing transfers of investor funds to a shadowy shell corporation under Derek's control. The figures showed millions embezzled to furnish his depraved indulgences with Cassidy. "That low-life scumbag," I erupted, anger detonating through me like an inferno. "He jeopardized the entire startup to bankroll his fling?" Vince nodded solemnly. "Not just that. He flat-out lied to employees and investors about the company's financial standing to keep the grift going as long as possible." White-hot rage surged through my veins. I thought back to all the times Derek had manipulated and gaslit me about money issues, siphoning my hard-earned income to sustain his double life of unbridled deceit. That malignant, narcissistic predator? I seethed, trembling with revulsion. He robbed me of my dignity and self-worth for his selfish, criminal pursuits. Just then, there was an insistent knock at the door. Vince and I exchanged puzzled glances before I moved to answer it. I pulled open the door to a cold draft, and the last person I expected to see. "Derek, what the hell are you doing here?" I hissed through gritted teeth. My wretched ex-husband barged past me into the apartment, his expression one of desperation and panic. "We need to talk," he pleaded, eyes darting around wildly. "This has gone too far, Amelia. You have to stop this crusade before it's too late." "Too late for what?" I arched an eyebrow, adrenaline coursing at his audacity to ambush me. "Too late for you to escape the consequences of your craven betrayal and fraud?" Derek ran his fingers through his disheveled hair, sweat beading on his forehead. "Please, the evidence you've amassed, it could ruin me, destroy my entire life's work if it gets out." I allowed a bitter laugh to escape my lips. "You mean the life's work of gaslit lying and cheating funded by other people's money? I'd say it's a ruination well-deserved, wouldn't you agree?" Vince emerged from the kitchen, glaring daggers at the pathetic man before us. "You've got a set of brass balls showing up here whimpering for mercy," he spat acidly, "after you demolish this family's future without a second thought." To my satisfaction, Derek shrank back under the searing rebuke. the mask of his self-assured facade permanently shattered, leaving nothing but the craven coward who had irrevocably fractured my heart. "I'll stop at nothing to make you atone for your trail of destruction," I stated coolly, fixing my treacherous ex-husband with an unflinching glare. "Consider this the mere first flicker of the inferno I'm going to rain down upon your shattered, deceitful life." Derek's shoulders slumped in anguished defeat as the gravity of his impending ruination took hold. He opened his mouth to protest, then seemed to think better of it. With leaden steps he turned and trudged out the door into the wintry night, alone, exposed, and bracing for the oncoming storm of searing justice I was determined to unleash. Mere days after Derek's pathetic attempt to grovel for mercy, I steeled myself to confront him again. But this time, on my terms. I strode into the Cipher Shield offices, head held high, despite the startled gazes of employees who recognized me. The sleek modern space seemed to reek of Derek's duplicity. I marched straight past the front desk toward his corner office. "Ma'am, you can't go back there," a flustered receptionist called after me, but I kept moving with determination. Flinging open his door, I fixed my soon-to-be ex-husband with a look of pure disgust. Derek was slumped at his desk, haggard shadows under his eyes betraying his lack of sleep. "We need to talk. Now?" I stated flatly. Derek startled at my intrusion, quickly regaining his composure with an indignant scowl. "What are you doing here, causing a scene, Amelia?" "Don't play dumb," I shot back hotly. "We both know I have irrefutable proof of your reprehensible affair and shady dealings here." Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a ceramic mug adorned with the face of that vapid bimbo Cassidy. My blood boiled at the audacity. "Using company funds to indulge your twisted fantasies with your little office whore?" I swept my arm across his desk, sending the mug and various files clattering to the floor in a cascade of papers and ceramic shards. "How dare you!" Derek erupted, leaping to his feet and pounding his fist on the desk. "This is my company, and I'll spend the money how I wish." "Your company?" I arched an eyebrow in contempt. "Or should I say, the company funded by investors and employees you've been ruthlessly duping for years to bankroll your pathetic infidelity." My words landed with sickening impact, Derek's feigned bravado crumbling. You have no proof," he stammered unconvincingly. Retrieving my phone, I pulled up the incriminating records Vince had gathered, the financial transfers, emails, travel logs of his rendezvous with Cassidy. I watched as each new dagger of evidence burrowed into Derek's facade. "Sure looks like proof of fraud and misappropriation to me," I stated coolly, holding the screen up for him to see the mountain of evidence. "I have more than enough to bury you unless you confess and resign immediately." Derek's chest heaved with impotent rage, knowing he was hopelessly cornered. Running his hands through his disheveled hair, panic crept across his features. You crazy bitch," he sputtered, spittle flying from his unhinged jaw. "Think anyone will believe your melodramatic hysterics over my reputation?" I fixed him with a look of pure, undisguised loathing. "The evidence speaks for itself, you immoral, gaslighting sociopath. I've played more than enough of your demented mind games." With a few taps, I sent the entire file repository to the Cipher Shield executive team and board of directors. Derek's phone instantly lit up with a flurry of alerts as his world began crashing down. "No," he croaked in disbelief, helplessly watching the reckoning unfold. "There's no escaping the truth this time," I stated with finality. "Nor the consequences of your compulsive lying and deception." In that moment, it became undeniably clear the facade had finally shattered. Gone was the smug narcissist, replaced by a sniveling, broken husk of a man. His chair squeaked as Derek collapsed back into it, seemingly deflating before my eyes. I turned on my heel and strode out, my disgust eclipsed by the grim satisfaction that justice had been decisively served. Still, deep down, I couldn't help feeling a lingering sense of gut-wrenching betrayal. The man I had loved, had built a life with, was nothing more than a mirage spun from greed and moral bankruptcy. But in the end, his greatest deception was the lie he had allowed me to believe, that the bind we once shared could ever be mended. For that, there would be no penance, no path to redemption. His downfall was complete and irrevocable, and I would emerge from the ashes, reborn and emboldened to forge a future free from the shackles of his depravity. In the aftermath of my explosive confrontation with Derek at Cypher Shield, the dominoes began to topple with ruthless momentum. Board members bombarded me with requests for details on the evidence against him. Investors screamed for answers about misappropriated funds. It was then that I knew I needed to bring in reinforcements. The situation had escalated beyond just exposing Derek's personal misdeeds. His entire empire was on the cusp of ruination. I turned to my loyal friend Sophia Larson, a brilliant corporate litigator I'd known since law school. If anyone could navigate the legal minefield ignited by Derek's malfeasance, it was her steely brilliance. "This is an absolute quagmire," Sophia muttered as she pored over the financial records and communication logs detailing Derek's affairs, both corporate and extramarital. She fixed me with an intense gaze. "Make no mistake, the evidence is damning. That snake husband of yours is looking at criminal fraud charges on multiple fronts along with termination." I nodded, adrenaline surging at the prospect of Derek facing maximum devastation for his transgressions. He deserves the book thrown at him. I want him to lose everything after how completely he betrayed me. "Oh, he will." Sophia's expression hardened. "We're going to systematically dismantle every shred of credibility and success he so arrogantly clung to. Facilitate a legal and PR bonfire that will incinerate Derek's reputation to ashes." Over the ensuing days, Sophia barraged Cypher Shield's board with a meticulous roadmap of Derek's deception and criminality. In tandem, she worked backdoor connections to funnel leaks about his indiscretions to media outlets. For his part, Derek remained outwardly defiant. He fought tooth and nail to shift blame and downplay the evidence. But legal proceedings were inexorably closing in, his corrupted legacy unraveling by the hour. I watched in perverse satisfaction as punishing headlines emblazoned Derek's face across publications: "Tech moguls fall from grace amid sex scandal," and "Cypher Shield CEO terminated, accused of fraud, embezzlement," became inescapable refrains. The evening the corporate axe officially fell, Vince and Sophia joined me at my apartment for a bottle of celebratory wine. We locked arms and cheered as footage of Derek being unceremoniously marched out of his offices by security flashed across the news. As the wine flowed, the catharsis truly sank in. My closest friends had stood resolute by my side in dismantling the once charmed life of my traitorous husband. We banded together, undaunted, to unleash the justice he deserved. "You did it, Em," Vince crowed, pulling me into a tight embrace. "The bastard got exactly what was coming to him." In those tender moments, a profound sense of renewal bloomed within me. The shackles of Derek's malfeasance no longer weighed me down. My tale of tragic betrayal had transmuted into one of triumphant rebirth, forged from the bonds of steadfast loyalty. I would never be a victim again. My friend's belief in me ignited a newfound inner fire, one that would blaze brightly, consuming any deceit that dared encroach upon the peace I had reclaimed. This was only the beginning. After the tsunami of humiliation Derek endured in the wake of his ouster from Cypher Shield, it felt cruelly fitting to deliver one final, crippling volley. A grand spectacle to raze any remaining remnants of his ruined reputation to the ground. Fate seemed to align when our city's annual Tech Hub conference rolled around a few weeks later. It was the perfect high-profile stage to showcase the true depths of his deceptions once and for all. Vince spearheaded the efforts, leveraging connections to ensure both Derek and his mistress Cassidy snapped up coveted invites. Salacious rumors had swirled in tech circles for weeks, so their presence ignited feverish anticipation. They took the bait, either oblivious to the firestorm brewing or too arrogantly defiant to heed the warning signs. On the night of the gala, I arrived through a discreet back entrance, carefully plotting my final ruinous gambit. Donning an elegant black gown, my appearance would be the calm before the storm. I took a fortifying breath as Vince and Sophia rendezvoused with me, sleek in their evening attire. "It's go time. You both remember the plan?" They nodded in grim acknowledgement, the gravity of this evening's events clear. This was about more than mere payback against Derek. It was about justice, irrefutable and blinding for all to bear witness. "Knock 'em dead, kiddo," Vince murmured with a reassuring squeeze of my arm. I slipped into the opulent grand ballroom, a hush falling over the crowd as I became visible. Derek stood near the stage, engaged in what appeared to be a heated discussion with a petulant Cassidy. Even through his rumpled tuxedo, the weight of recent weeks had clearly exacted its toll. Striding to the center of the room, I felt hundreds of probing gazes scrutinizing my movements. Let them feast their eyes and minds for the reckoning to come. Tapping the microphone twice, I cleared my throat, the sound piercing through the tension like a thunderclap. "Excuse me, everyone. May I have your attention, please?" My voice rang with commanding authority, instantly silencing any lingering whispers. My name is Amelia Archer. Many of you are likely familiar with the sordid allegations surrounding my husband, the disgraced Derek Archer, and his criminal fraud along with infidelity involving the woman beside him, Cassidy Wells. An audible murmuring rippled through the ballroom as I gestured to the pair, paralyzed like deer in headlights under the ever-intensifying spotlight. "Well, those rumors are all true, and then some," I pronounced with finality, holding up a tablet displaying the reams of incriminating documentation. This degenerate knowingly embezzled millions from Cipher Shield, a firm founded on the labor and investments of this entire community, for his own crooked interests. The tension hung thick as onlookers absorbed the extent of my words. But perhaps even more repulsively, he financed a protracted, despicable affair with his colleague Cassidy by diverting those misappropriated funds to luxury hotel gifts and other salacious trysts. Jaws agape. The crowd drank in every damning detail. I fixed Derek with a searing glare as he feebly tried to protest, his mouth opening and closing in futile dismay. "So let this sordid saga serve as a righteous reckoning against the moral failings of greed, infidelity, and exploitation," I proclaimed with conviction. "This towering monument to decadence must implode under the weight of its own iniquities." As if on cue, Sophia initiated the video sequence assembled from the annexed files. Lurid photo evidence, salacious email exchanges, and incriminating financial statements flashing across the giant ballroom screens for all to absorb in unvarnished detail. A guttural cry of mortification rang out as Cassidy collapsed to her knees, clawing and grasping at whatever dignity she could salvage. Derek stood stupefied, transfixed by the carnage of his sickening misdeeds materializing before him. You're unhinged," he managed to sputter incredulously, veins protruding in his flushed face. "Still spinning lies to shield your inflated ego from accepting the truth?" I coolly retorted, stepping forward to meet my wretched adversary eye to eye. "That pathological tendency was your ultimate downfall." Derek faltered under my unrelenting gaze, shaking his head in vain denial. "Face it, Derek, you are a shattered, morally bankrupt disgrace of a human being, a vermin who exploited the trust and resources of everyone around you to satisfy your grotesque vices. You don't deserve a shred of redemption or dignity." He opened his mouth once more, a final merciful protestation no doubt waiting on his lips, but I'd allowed his poison more oxygen than it deserved already. "Your debt to society has finally come due," I stated with finality. "This is justice. Ugly, furious, yet utterly warranted justice. May its searing conviction blacken your name into irreversible infamy." With that, I turned on my heel and marched away, leaving Derek to wallow in the smoldering ruins of the life he had so ruthlessly disgraced through deception and indulgence, karma's reckoning complete. In the aftermath of my explosive unveiling at the Tech Hub Gala, Derek's life detonated in spectacular fashion. No sphere was left unscathed as the towering inferno of his sins raged. Within days, Cipher Shield's remaining investors launched a blistering lawsuit, citing racketeering, fraud, and embezzlement charges that could bankrupt Derek for decades. Corporate sponsors began falling like dominoes. Termination letters flooded in as news of his depraved conduct with Cassidy circulated. Any upstanding firm couldn't risk the stain of association. Several media outlets, salivating over the salacious scandal, unearthed further incriminating details. Testimonies from relatives and former employees painted a disturbing portrait of clinical narcissism and serial infidelities that called Derek's entire professional career into question. For my part, I opted out of the media circus, letting the uncontestable evidence dismantle his legacy of deceit. I spent evenings with Vince and Sophia, sharing bottles of bold Cabernet in solemn celebration of justice served. "I still can't believe we pulled that off at the gala." Vince grinned one night, clinking his wine glass against mine. "Did you see Derek's face when the videos started rolling? He looked like he'd been gut-punched by a freight train. And that sniveling shrew Cassidy, Sophia chimed in with a derisive scoff, served her right for betraying her entire gender to cozy up to that creep's ill-gotten riches. We shared a cathartic laugh at their expense. After the maelstrom of deception and pain, seeing the catalysts of betrayal suffer their just deserts was perversely uplifting. I had confronted the harsh realities of evil, emerged vindicated. However, the sweet, lingering reverberations of victory curdled one fateful evening a few weeks later. A familiar name flashed across my phone screen, Derek. I froze, my chest tightening with disbelieving dread. Part of me thought he'd slink permanently into exile after the humiliation. But of course, malignant denial seemed to course through his veins. I let the call go to voicemail as his desperate ramblings crackled from the speaker. Something about not being able to access accounts or funds, needing one last conversation to explain his side. I shook my head grimly, the audacity of his pleas stoking anger through my veins. How pathetically typical of him to beg for scraps after such scorched earth destruction. When another insistent call came through, I answered with fury blazing. What could you possibly want after everything you've put me through? Your staggering greed and depravity were enough to incinerate your entire life to ashes. I'm utterly ruined. Derek's voice trembled, a husk of his once arrogantly boastful tenor. The lawsuits, the investigations, I can't escape any of it. And whose moral bankruptcy dealt that fatal wound? I countered acidly, reveling in dismantling the remnants of his fragile ego. Did you think there would be no dire consequences for betraying me in such a horrific, protracted manner, for pillaging everyone around you to indulge your deviant appetites? I'm penniless, Amelia, Derek continued, a hollow plea creeping into his voice. I have nowhere to turn. Just give me a chance to explain. Please. Save your sniveling excuses, I seethed with finality. Any man possessing even an iota of a soul would not relentlessly trample on the sanctity of marriage and those he claimed to cherish. There was a pregnant pause as Derek registered the futility of redemption. You've made your wretched bed, I pronounced with conviction. Now lie in it and ruminate on the consequences of your corrosive greed and ego until your dying day. With that, I terminated the call, severing any lingering embers of remorse for my husband's self-immolated downfall. He was now an ashen husk in my mind, effectively excised from existence. It was over. Justice had been rendered in all its blistering glory. In the serene 2 years following my campaign of scorched earth defiance against Derek, I found unexpected solace in rebirth. Gone are the shackles of betrayal and emotional tumult, forsaken along with our sham marital vows the instant his trail of deceit unraveled. In their place now shines a renewed inner radiance, forged from the bonds of friendship that guided me through my bleakest suffering. When the smoke finally cleared and Derek's raging inferno of misdeeds smoldered to cinders, I turned inward. With Vince and Sophia's counsel, I devoted myself to intensive therapy, healing the deep scars inflicted by my depraved husband's utter lack of morality or remorse. For a time, deflecting bitter thoughts about the devastation he wrought proved agonizing. When waves of anger and trauma roiled, I medicated, seeking stillness through exercise, meditation, immersing myself in nature's soothing expanses. Slowly but surely, I rediscovered the fire of my own indomitable spirit that shattered Derek's web of lies. Days faded into months, then years. I savored each incremental reawakening of my confidence, passion, and purpose, unshackled from his lurid exploits and treachery. My stalwart career as a software engineer remained a bedrock through it all. I excelled on ambitious projects, mentored bright junior engineers, and fiercely protected my team's talent from toxic cultures of dishonest leaders. In turn, terraces shower me with new opportunities, raises, leadership roles, finally culminating in a director position managing cutting-edge cryptography initiatives. I redoubled my pursuits of creative stimulation as well. I relished adventures with Vince and Sophia, exotic vacations, theatrical shows, and other indulgences that awakened a renewed lust for experiencing the richness of life. On one such trip, hiking through the lush rainforests of Costa Rica, I found myself marveling at our resilient friendship. When embers of doubt crept into my psyche in those first turbulent months post-Derek, their belief in my brighter destiny never wavered. You know, It was your unwavering moral compass that ultimately saved all of us from falling prey to that snake. Vince reflected wistfully as we traversed the verdant jungle paths. If you hadn't been willing to go scorched earth, who knows how much more damage he could have inflicted. I contemplated those words, embracing their profound resonance. By exposing Derek's lecherous criminality, I hadn't merely claimed vengeance. I had redirected my life path away from that corrosive spiral of deception. That chapter of suffering while anguishing had transmuted into catalyzing events that forged me into a stronger, more self-assured woman. No longer would I meekly accept exploitation or cruelty at the hands of anyone, colleagues or lovers. I embraced uncompromising defiance as a protective reflex, a shield hardened by the purifying fires I'd stared down and conquered. Now, each new dawn delivering novel challenges and adventures exhilarates me with fresh possibility. What heights can I scale if tempered by the lessons of betrayal's harsh tutelage? What bonds might I cultivate, untainted by doubts that strengthen my tenacity and uplift others from despair? These are the unanswered wonders beckoning me into the bright horizons shimmering ahead. A panorama free from the toxic specter of derailed dreams and despoiled trust that I once lamented under Derek. Now, only wispy embers of my former life still smolder, no longer possessing the vitality to sear me with anguish. They have dissipated to half-remembered phantoms, devoured by the radiant rising of my triumphant, remade identity. My name is Amelia. I am a survivor, rededicated to abundance and grace, and my journey soars ever onward without limitation. We need to talk. Those 4 words from Nathan's lips detonated the bomb that would obliterate my life as I knew it. I stared at him, dread creeping up my spine, as he scrolled through his phone with an expression I couldn't read. I found these messages between you and Kira. He turned the screen to face me, and there it was. The undeniable proof of his infidelity glaring back at me. It's been going on for over a year. She's pregnant, Marla. We're starting a new life together. The words hung in the air like a noxious gas, choking me. I wanted to cry, to scream, to run, but I could only gape as decades of marriage crumbled around me. Well? Nathan snapped. Say something. My chest tightened as anger sliced through the paralysis. You son of a bitch, I growled through clenched teeth. After everything we've been through? After 23 years of building a family? It's not like that, he protested. I never meant to hurt you. Kira and I just clicked. She understands me in a way you never could. Fire blazed in my eyes. Oh, I understand you perfectly now. You're a liar, a cheater, and a disgrace. Nathan recoiled as if struck. Give me a break, Marla. You've been so wrapped up with your parents, I felt neglected. This is as much your fault as mine. I shot to my feet, fury propelling me. My fault? I've supported us for years while you chased one get-rich scheme after another. Don't you dare try to blame me for your lack of character. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off, grabbing my purse and keys. Save it. I want a divorce, and I'm taking you for everything you're worth. Without waiting for a response, I stormed out, the sudden silence giving no comfort. My hands shook as I fumbled with the car keys, tears I'd refused to shed burning my eyes. How could this be happening? After so many years, so many struggles we'd faced together, Nathan had thrown it all away for a fling with a woman young enough to be his daughter. Worse, he'd compounded that betrayal by impregnating her. White-hot anger lanced through me, hardening my resolve. I wouldn't be the wounded, weeping wife history discarded as a footnote. Nathan would regret the day he ever looked at another woman. This was just the opening salvo in a war he had no idea was coming. And by the time I was done, he'd be broken and begging for scraps of the life he'd so casually discarded. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel as I pulled onto the road. There would be no more tears, only the cold, brutal satisfaction of watching Nathan's world burn. This can't be happening. I stared at the pile of boxes and furniture crammed into the dingy one-bedroom apartment, a far cry from the beautiful home Nathan and I had shared. The divorce had been messy, but in the end, the judge awarded me this place, along with custody of our parents. Need any help, dear? I turned to see Mom, her brow creased with confusion. Even in her early stage of Alzheimer's, she could sense the upheaval. Forcing a smile, I took her hand. It's all right, Mom. Just moving into a new place. The lie felt like acid on my tongue. I hated deceiving her, but the full truth would only cause her more anguish. Better she remained blissfully unaware of Nathan's ultimate betrayal. "Marla?" Dad's voice, already strained from Parkinson's, filtered in from the other room. "A little assistance, please?" I squeezed Mom's hand reassuringly. "Coming, Dad." I found him slumped on the couch, his medication bottle lying open and empty on the floor. Quickly, I gathered the scattered pills and fixed him a glass of water. "I'm so sorry," I murmured, helping him swallow the drugs, keeping his tremors at bay. "This move has been chaos. I'll stay on top of your prescriptions from now on, I promise." He patted my arm with a shaky hand. "No need to apologize, kiddo. I know you're doing your best with, well, everything." A lump formed in my throat at the weary grace in his eyes. For over 20 years, I'd been the one caring for them as their conditions worsened, while Nathan went through get-rich-quick phases like clockwork. Now he'd left me holding the bag altogether, and not for the first time his timing was exquisitely selfish. "Marla?" Mom's anxious voice carried from the other room. "Hello? I can't find my way." I forced back tears, squeezing Dad's hand before hurrying to Mom. Of course, she'd gotten turned around in the unfamiliar apartment. "I'm here, Mom," I said gently, taking her arm to guide her. "Let's get you settled, okay?" Over the next few hours, I shuttled between caring for my parents' needs, ensuring their medications, making them comfortable, answering the same questions over and over as Alzheimer's stole Mom's short-term memory anew each time. By the time I finally collapsed into bed long after midnight, I was utterly spent. And yet, despite my exhaustion, anger simmered within me at how easy Nathan had it now. While I juggled working full-time as a nurse to make ends meet, maintaining a home for our parents, and dealing with the emotional turmoil he'd caused, he was off reveling in his shiny new life with his pregnant mistress. Kira's youth and beauty were icing on the cake of his ego. My fists clenched at the thought of them together, blissfully fornicated, while I struggled under the weight of his selfishness. But I promised myself it wouldn't be that way for long. Soon I'd deploy the intel I'd gathered on Nathan's misdeeds. His duplicitous life would start unraveling, and every silk-sheeted morning with Kira would taste more and more like ashes in his mouth. No matter what it took, I would grind his new facade into dust. Nathan would learn there was a heavy price to pay for betraying me. The musty tang of old paperwork filled my nostrils as I pored over the financial records splayed across the dinette table. Printouts, post-it notes, and spreadsheets painted a damning portrait, one revealing the full depth of Nathan's deceit. In addition to bilking money from our joint accounts to fund his affair, he'd taken out massive loans against our assets and made a series of catastrophically bad investments. If his web of lies wasn't unraveled soon, there would be virtually nothing left for me and our parents. A harsh reminder tone from my phone made me start. I glanced at the time, cursing under my breath as I realized I was running critically late to pick up Dad from his physical therapy session. Shoving the paperwork aside, I grabbed my purse and car keys. Mom would be fine for a short while. Her daily routine of watching game shows and tending to her bird ensured she stayed occupied. But if I didn't retrieve Dad soon, his simmering resentment at having to rely on me would only intensify. The geriatric center's waiting room was deserted, except for Dad slumped in a vinyl chair, his body trembling slightly from the Parkinson's. His face was thunderous as I hurried over. "Nice of you to finally show up," he growled without looking at me. "In case you forgot, I'm not getting any younger here." I cringed inwardly at his harsh tone, but I deserved it. Between caring for Mom, my job at the hospital, and trying to salvage our finances, I constantly dropped the ball when it came to being present for him. "I'm so sorry, Dad," I said, grabbing his arm to help lever him upright. "It won't happen again." He grunted in acknowledgement but remained stone-faced, at least until his gnarled hand clamped over mine, his eyes softening as they met my gaze. "You've got a hell of a lot on your plate, kiddo, more than any one person should have to shoulder." I felt my throat tighten at his gruff sympathy, swallowing hard against the sting of tears. "I'm okay, really. We'll get through this." A tremor rippled through his frame as he squeezed my hand. "That no-good son of a bitch yanked the rug out from under you. But you listen to me, Marla. You are not alone in this fight, you hear?" Though his voice was weakened by age and illness, An undercurrent of determination flowed through his words. I was reminded of how Dad had provided for us through sheer grit after his factory job was outsourced, refusing to let misfortune shatter our family. Fierceness kindled within me, banishing the urge to buckle under the strain of Nathan's betrayal. Dad's strength was my blood, throbbing with righteous tenacity and the promise of vengeance. "You're right, Dad," I said, squaring my shoulders. "Nathan's not going to get away with any of this. I'm going to hit him from every angle until there's nothing left." The gleam in Dad's eyes mirrored the nascent fire inside me. "That's my girl. Now go get him and show that bastard exactly what he's messing with." I felt a withering clarity form around my fury as we slowly made our way to the car. No more would I merely react to the chaos Nathan had created. From now on, I would become the eye of the storm itself, plotting his total destruction with cold, meticulous precision. Every selfish decision, every sleazy misdeed of his would be weaponized, returning to haunt him tenfold. I would become the sword of karma itself, slicing through every delusion until he was left with nothing but the harsh reckoning he deserved. By the time I was done with Nathan Bennett, his supposed perfect new life with Kira would lie in ashes, and he would finally understand the overwhelming burn of consequences he never saw coming. "This is never how I envisioned my career going," Jackson said with a self-deprecating chuckle as he spread the divorce paperwork across his desk. The overhead light gleamed off his thick gray hair as he scanned the documents, helping take down lying bastards like your soon-to-be ex-husband. A wry smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be working closely with a hotshot corporate lawyer to dismantle my marriage, I would have laughed in their face. Jackson's grizzled appearance and blunt manner masked an intelligence that could fillet you without breaking a sweat. He was exactly the kind of pit bull I needed in my corner. "I can't thank you enough for this, Jackson." I leaned forward, keeping my voice low and intense. "Nathan doesn't realize it yet, but he's wandered into a minefield, and I'm counting on you to ensure he doesn't make it out in one piece." Jackson's ice-blue eyes held my gaze with surprising warmth. "You got it, kiddo. We'll hit that bastard from every angle. Financial malfeasance, alienation of assets, negligence towards your parents. By the time this is over, he'll be lucky if he can afford a cardboard box under an overpass." I nodded, satisfied by his grim certainty. But there was still one key element missing from my plan: insight on Nathan's new lover and cohort in betrayal, Kira. That was where Leah came in, her startling appearance at the cafe nearly making me choke on my coffee. "Marla Bennett, right?" The petite brunette slid into the seat across from me, her expression a blend of wariness and distaste. "I'm Leah, Kira's sister." My eyebrows shot up at this unexpected development. I didn't realize Kira had any family in the area. "Well, we're not exactly close," she said with a derisive snort. "That etiquette-eschewing tramp hasn't spoken to me since she shacked up with your lying dirtbag husband." Leah's disdain was palpable, her hazel eyes blazing with disgust. Family drama clearly ran deep. "Let me guess," I replied, leaning back in my chair to study her. "You want to help take them down as much as I do." A feral grin carved itself across her delicate features as she nodded. "You could say I have a vested interest in seeing that bastard get what's coming to him." Over the next hour, Leah regaled me with a litany of jaw-dropping details about Nathan and Kira's sordid affair. Graphic sexual encounters in seedily locations, furtive payoffs to keep Kira in a life of empty glamour as Nathan frittered away money behind my back, her callous indifference to the child she was carrying. With each new lurid revelation, my blood boiled hotter. Nathan's appalling lack of integrity was exceeded only by Kira's sociopathic amorality. That's a lot to process. I finally managed once Leah's tirade wound down. While part of me felt sickened to my core, another part thrilled at the upswing in ammunition against them both. Leah arched one sculpted eyebrow, clearly sensing my restraint. "You wanted the unvarnished truth about those two scumbags. I'm giving you a grenade to lob straight into the middle of their sordid fairy tale. The question is, do you have the balls to pull the pin and watch it all explode?" I held her gaze, feeling an icy clarity form around my fury. This was my chance to strike at the dark heart of Nathan's hedonistic delusions. No more indecision or moral restraint. "You're damn right I do," I said flatly. It's time to unmake those two once and for all. By the time I left the cafe, my steps were lighter than they'd been in weeks. Every carefully gathered thread was finally weaving together into an inescapable snare. Nathan would soon learn that betrayal cut both ways, and the bite of my retaliation would go straight to the bone. You can't be serious. Nathan's voice was low, dangerous, as he glared across the table at me. You're really going to drag my career into this? I met his stare with an icy calm, sliding the thick dossier towards him. Pages of meticulously compiled evidence detailing his financial improprieties and alienation of assets laid bare like a visual indictment. As you can see, I'm deadly serious. My tone carried no inflection, no waver. This is just the opening salvo, Nathan. I'll burn everything around you until there's nothing left. His jaw clenched, anger and disbelief warring across his features as he flipped through the damning pages. Good. Let him be enraged. Let him finally understand the sheer depths of my wrath. Where did you even get this? He sputtered, slamming the dossier down hard enough to rattle the silverware. Have you been having me followed or something? A humorless smirk tugged at the corner of my mouth. You're the one who insisted on turning our lives into a nightmare. Don't act so shocked that I'm simply fighting fire with fire. Comprehension slowly dawned in the tightness around his eyes as he processed my casual ruthlessness. At long last, Nathan could see the cold, implacable resolve driving me. Marla, his voice dropped, took on a vaguely placating tone that immediately raised my hackles. I get that you're angry, but maybe we should take a step back here, for both our sakes and the kids. Don't. My finger jabbed down on the table, cutting off his manipulative spin. Don't you dare try to play the family card with me after everything you've done. That ship sailed the second you knocked up your slut on the side. His nostrils flared, tendons standing out in stark relief in his neck. But he stayed silent, waiting for me to unleash the rest of my fury. Starting today, I declare war on you and your mistress's illusions of happiness, I said, each clipped word dripping with contempt. That cozy little bundle of lies you've constructed, I'm going to rip it apart piece by piece. I slid a manila envelope across the table towards him, the corners digging in gouges on the wood. Those are just a few samples of the images and informant testimonies I've gathered about you two lovebirds. Every sordid hookup, every nickel you blew on that trashy lifestyle while I struggled to keep our parents alive, it's all there in glorious detail. Nathan sucked in a sharp breath as he thumbed through a few of the photos, which clearly depicted him and Kira in varying states of debauchery. But his surprise quickly morphed into an all-too-familiar, smarmy bravado. Is that all you got? One corner of his mouth curled into a disdainful sneer. You think a few nudie pics and slut-shaming is going to intimidate me? I'm not the one on shaky financial ground here. My expression remained impassive, a porcelain mask belying the volcanic fury simmering within me. Slowly, deliberately, I leaned back in my chair and let my gaze sweep over every inch of the man who had once been my husband, my partner, my promised safety. By the time our divorce proceedings are over, you're going to be buried so deep in legal fees and financial ruin that you'll be begging for table scraps, I said, each word measured and certain. But money problems are just the start of your worries. Letting the weight of that statement hang in the air for a beat, I withdrew a sheaf of papers held together with a smudged paperclip. With glacial precision, I slid them over to punctuate my vow. Those contain eyewitness affidavits and documentation detailing the wanton neglect you've shown towards Mom and Dad's care. I'm sure a law enforcement investigation into potential elder abuse would make for some very inconvenient headlines at that firm of yours. For the first time since we'd started this little encounter, Nathan's bravado cracked. A flicker of uncertainty, of naked fear, danced in his widening eyes as he registered the full scope of my intentions. As the silence stretched out between us, I allowed myself a final verbal bayonet thrust. You wanted freedom from your responsibilities? Well, congratulations, Nathan. You're about to get your wish. And you're going to spend whatever's left of your miserable existence paying for it in ways you can't even imagine yet. The steady clicking of the court reporter's keys was the only sound in the tense, wood-paneled room as Judge Richards paged through the thick dossier before him. His stern features remained inscrutable, giving no hint as to how heavily the evidence was weighing against Nathan. Seated beside Jackson at the plaintiff's table, I kept my own expression neutral, focused. This was the endgame, the culmination of months spent meticulously undermining every aspect of Nathan's life. After today's ruling, nothing would be the same for him ever again. Mr. Bennett. The judge's gravelly voice sliced through the stillness like a blade. Nathan straightened in his chair, a sheen of sweat visible on his brow. Based on the extensive financial documentation and third-party testimony provided here, it's clear you have engaged in repeated and willful alienation of assets, Judge Richards stated, his tone flat and clinical. Money that should have gone towards ensuring the care of your elderly parents was funneled into irresponsible investments and a lifestyle incompatible with your obligations as a spouse. One of Nathan's lawyers made a move to stand, a retort forming on his lips, but the judge silenced him with an icy look. I haven't finished. He turned his glare fully onto Nathan. Would you care to explain why the court should consider your accounts and property claims as anything other than utterly compromised, Mr. Bennett? Because these materials paint a deeply unpalatable picture. Nathan swallowed hard, shifting in his seat as he struggled to meet the judge's withering stare. Your Honor, I made some mistakes in judgment, I'll admit, but my financial affairs have no bearing on how I handled my responsibilities towards my family. The words had barely left his mouth before Jackson was on his feet, angrily waving a sheaf of papers from our evidence trove. No bearing? He shook his head in disdain. After betraying his vows and squandering money on affairs, Bennett left his wife to single-handedly tend to his parents' declining health, one with Parkinson's, the other suffering from Alzheimer's. We have sworn affidavits and medical bills here showing incontrovertible neglect. Nathan tried to interject, but the torrent of Jackson's words drowned him out. This man forfeited his right to any consideration long ago, Your Honor. Jackson thundered, fury thrumming in his voice. He does not deserve a single dime from these proceedings. I watched, feeling an electric crackle of vindication spark along my nerves, as Nathan fought to regain his composure under the weight of Jackson's assault. His jaw clenched, that familiar, entitled mask slipping back into place, but his eyes betrayed flickers of desperation. The judge's voice cut through the tension, a well-timed incision lancing the roiling anger in the room. I've heard enough. Piercing both legal teams with a quelling look, he squared his shoulders and began delivering his ruling in a tone of finality. Based on the extensive evidence of asset mismanagement and negligent conduct exhibited by Mr. Nathan Bennett, I am awarding the plaintiff, Mrs. Marla Bennett, with sole rights and ownership over the marital home and its assets. Furthermore, Mr. Bennett must provide spousal support and funds for the ongoing care of his elderly parents. Nathan's face had drained of all color as Judge Richards enumerated the punitive list, the legal and financial pillars of his life, crumbling in accordance with my carefully executed plan. I felt a surge of fierce elation, watching him come face to face with the consequences of his selfishness. Mr. Bennett will be granted no share of liquid assets, investments, or property division in these proceedings. Nor will he maintain any claims over future inheritance entitlements, which shall be immediately frozen pending an investigation into potential criminal culpability regarding elder abuse and misappropriation. In that moment, I could have sworn I heard the crystal shattering of every illusion Nathan had surrounded himself with. As scattered protests erupted around him, I simply held his stricken gaze with mine. Unflinching, resolute. This was what the cruelty of his betrayal had wrought. This was the karma he'd brought upon himself through his own disregard. Across the room, our eyes locked in an apex of anguish and triumph. And in that suspended instant, we both fully understood. Nathan Bennett's reckoning had finally and utterly arrived. The sleek metal briefcase made a satisfying thunk as I dropped it onto Nathan's boss's desk. McDermott, a jowly, perpetually frowning man, raised an inquisitive eyebrow at me. I think you'll want to review the contents of that very carefully, I said, keeping my tone brisk and businesslike despite the vindictive thrill uncurling inside me. It contains comprehensive evidence of unethical conduct by one of your senior employees. McDermott's frown deepened. but he made no move to open the briefcase. "I don't have time for games, Mrs. Bennet. What is this about?" Rather than answer directly, I pulled out my phone and thumbed over to the gallery, pulling up the sheaf of damning financial records and lurid photos. "Does your company have any policies regarding misappropriation of funds?" I asked, turning the screen to show McDermott the first few images, ones clearly depicting Nathan cavorting with his mistress during company hours, or rules about employees operating side businesses and investment schemes using company resources. McDermott's beefy face turned an alarming shade of puce as he rapidly cycled through the pictures and documents. When he finally looked up at me again, tendons stood out in thick cords on his neck. "Where did you get these?" His gravelly voice was a mix of fury and unease. I allowed myself a razor-thin smile. "I have sources. But more importantly, I have proof that Nathan Bennet has been grossly abusing his position at this firm to enable his infidelity and shady personal dealings." Planting my palms on McDermott's desk, I leaned forward to catch and hold his gaze. "He's a liability, one that could jeopardize your entire company's standing if this information got into the wrong hands. But I'm giving you the chance to handle this in-house, so to speak." McDermott's jaw clenched hard as he processed my none-too-subtle threat. I watched the realization wash over him that I had him precisely where I wanted. When he finally spoke, his tone was as cold and hard as the briefcase between us. "Consider it handled. That son of a bitch is through here the second I can push the paperwork." I allowed myself a thin, satisfied smile, pushing back from the desk. "Pleasure doing business with you." As I strode down the corridors towards the exit, I could feel the knot of anger that had driven me for so long finally beginning to uncoil. The wheels of Nathan's undoing had well and truly been set in motion. By the time I made it home, a voicemail was already waiting for me. I felt a surge of vicious triumph as Nathan's voice, strained and desperate, issued from the speaker. "Marla, please, you have to call me back. I don't know what you think you're doing, but I just got terminated from my job. They're accusing me of misusing funds and corporate resources for my own gain. This is insane. You've gone way too far with this vendetta. If we can just sit down and talk." I rolled my eyes in disgust, hitting the delete button to purge his plea from existence. Nathan's spectacular downward spiral was too little, too late, which was hammered home a few hours later by the shrill ring of my doorbell. I swung the door open to find a panicked, red-eyed Kira on my front step. "You," she spat, her voice shaking with rage and confusion. "What did you do? Nathan's life is in ruins. The money's gone, his career is destroyed, his reputation shredded, and now he says he can't even support me and my baby?" I drank in Kira's unraveling with undisguised relish. Let her feel the sting of her own selfishness, the bitter consequences of her choices. Let her see the paradise she'd tried to create atop Nathan's lies, withering away to bitter ash. Did you really think it would all just work out? My tone dripped with disdain. That Nathan would be able to walk away from the damage he caused, start over with a clean slate? Hurt and bewilderment flashed across Kira's features as the reality sank in. I had well and truly dismantled any future she'd envisioned with Nathan. A detached part of me felt a stab of pity for her. She was, after all, just a foolish pawn who'd bought into his con. But she'd made her bed with Nathan, and now they could lie in the smoldering ruins together. "This is the bed you two made," I said, cold finality in my voice. "I hope you're comfortable in it." With that, I stepped back and closed the door in her face, shutting out her gasped protests. There would be no more discussion, no compromise. I'd executed my revenge with perfect precision, and Nathan's world was left burning because of it. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, watching as Mom fussed absent-mindedly with Dad's blankets. Her mind might have been fading, but her nurturing instincts remained. "There you go, dear," she cooed, patting Dad's hand with a tremulous smile. "All comfy." Dad's eyes crinkled at the corners as he returned her smile. Though the Parkinson's had continued its inexorable progression, he seemed content, peaceful even. They both did. Seeing them together, safe and cared for in the home I had fought so viciously to keep, I felt something inside me finally unclench. The white-hot anger that had propelled me for so long dimmed, replaced by a sense of closure. "Everything okay in here?" I made my presence known, moving to sit on the edge of Dad's bed. Dad's roomy eyes found mine, their depths still bright with the core of steel I remembered from my childhood. "More than okay, kiddo. Your old man's living the dream in this swanky assisted living setup you got us." I ducked my head, suddenly bashful under the gruff affection in his tone. "It's the least I could do to make up for everything you two went through." "Don't sell yourself short, Marla." His gnarled hand found mine, squeezing with surprising strength. "You went through hell and came out swinging harder than anyone could have expected. We're proud of you, kiddo. Proud as hell." My throat grew thick with emotion at his simple sincerity. So much bitterness and betrayal, and I emerged tempered, not broken. Squaring my shoulders, I squeezed Dad's hand in return. "I did what I had to," I said, keeping my voice level, "to protect our family and settle some scores in the process." Mom, bless her innocent heart, piped up obliviously. "Such a good girl, our Marla. Why, when we heard that Nathan ran off with that other woman, we could barely believe it. Poor thing must have been going through some sort of crisis to do something so foolish." A wry chuckle slipped from me at her cheerfully revisionist perspective on the events that had sundered our lives. Maybe it was for the best she remained unaware of the uglier realities. "Something like that, Mom," I said, ruffling her sweetly bemused expression with a smile of my own. My gaze strayed to the framed photos clustered on Dad's nightstand, sick guilt and vindication warring within me. In one, Nathan and I beamed out at happier, more naive versions of ourselves. Another showed our tiny family unit radiant at Mom and Dad's 50th wedding anniversary, so ensconced in our illusion of forever. And then there was the final photo. Just me and my parents. The strained smiles and body language speaking to the turmoil that had nearly torn us apart. But we'd emerged from the crucible, somehow still together, with a bottomless wellspring of tenacity to show for it. My phone buzzed in my pocket, the caller ID displaying Jackson's number. I rejected the call. Whatever legal semblance of business still lingered between us could wait. Standing, I leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to Dad's forehead, then Mom's, letting the reality of our renewed stability settle over me. Countless nights of agony and rage had been endured, all towards crafting this hard-won victor. "I'm going to run some errands," I murmured. "I'll check on you two later, okay?" Dad rumbled an affirmative as I slipped from the room. Out in the hallway I paused, bracing my hands on the walls as I drew in a deep cleansing breath. The clinic didn't need me for a few hours. Ample time to stop by the community garden and tend to my little plot of hard-won rebirth. My own personal oasis of new beginnings fostered from the scorched earth of betrayal. One way or another, every crisis ushered in the chance to start anew. And as I squared my shoulders and strode towards the exit, I silently celebrated leaving the ashes of the past behind me. No matter what the future held, I would emerge from the flames again, resilient, proud, and unstoppable. And of course the beach house should go to me. Ava's sharp voice cut through the murmurs filling the room. After all, I'm the eldest. My blood turned to ice in my veins as I listened to my stepdaughter's words. We were gathered for Ethan's wake, and before his body was even cold, his children from his first marriage were already squabbling over his assets like hungry vultures. Leo nodded vigorously. For sure, the old man would have wanted us to have it. All those summers we spent out there as kids. Nora shifted uncomfortably but said nothing as Ava continued. This entire situation is just obscene. How could he leave everything to that woman? She jerked her head in my direction, blind hatred glinting in her eyes. I felt Derek's firm hand on my arm, grounding me. Ethan's oldest friend and our family lawyer leaned in. Don't listen to them, Mira. This is just the grief and greed talking. But it didn't feel that way to me. Not with the venom in Ava's voice as she spat. She was nothing more than a glorified nurse he took pity on after his divorce. We're his real family. The snakes had slithered out while I was still reeling from Ethan's death. Just 2 weeks ago, he had been hale and hearty, regaling our son Caleb with plans for his 13th birthday trip. Now he was gone, struck down by a heart attack, sudden and cruel, and his offspring from his first marriage were wasting no time asserting their birthright. Caleb tugged at my sleeve, eyes wide with confusion and fear. Poor boy didn't understand the depths of his siblings' depravity. Sweet, sensitive Caleb, who had adored his father with every fiber of his being, while they had been poisoned by greed. Ava sneered at me again, and I stiffened, gripping Caleb's hand tightly. How dare these ingrates dishonor Ethan's memory mere days after his passing? He had taken care of them, doted on them, rebuilt his relationship with them after the divorce, despite their mother's objections. And this was how they repaid him, by lusting after his estate before he was even laid to rest. A familiar voice rang out, stern but controlled. "That's enough." Derek had stepped forward, shoulders squared. "Out of respect for Ethan, I must ask that you keep such discussions private for now. Give the man a goddamn chance to be laid to rest properly before you start squabbling like this." For a beat, a tense hush fell over the room. Then Leo opened his mouth, that perpetual sneer on his lips. But Derek raised his hand, a calming gesture but one that brokered no arguments. "I'll be reaching out soon to all of you regarding dispersal of assets. But not today. We're here to mourn Ethan and celebrate his life, not indulge petty monetary disagreements. Are we clear?" Ava looked murderous, but she gave a terse nod. "Crystal." She still, then turned on her heel and stormed out, Leo and Nora trailing behind. In their wake, a fragile silence shattered only by Caleb's hiccuping sobs. I pulled my son close, stroking his hair as my own tears flowed. Little did those vultures know, but Ethan had one final ace up his sleeve. As I clutched his last letter to me, written in shaky but determined strokes, I knew that he would have his justice. The game was just beginning. Sleep eluded me that night as Ethan's words burned in my mind. "My dearest Mira, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened." I rolled onto my side, clutching the crumpled sheets as the memory washed over me in vivid detail. It was just last week that I had discovered the thin manila envelope tucked in Ethan's desk drawer, my name scrawled across it in his familiar handwriting. At first I had shrugged it off, assuming it was related to another of his business matters. But then I spotted the date, just 3 days before his fatal heart attack. My hands had trembled as I sliced through the envelope's flap. 5 neatly folded sheets fluttered out, each bearing a number, 1 through 5. Ethan's meticulous nature shone through even here, it seemed. As I unfurled the first page, the bottom dropped out of my stomach. It was a letter explicitly intended for me to read after he was gone. An icy chill gripped me as I started to read, barely paying attention to Caleb's playing in the next room. "My dearest Mira, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened and I am no longer with you." My heart thudded as I inched forward. "When we married 11 years ago, you became my true partner in every sense of the word. You have been the calm in my storm, the night to my day, the unshakable foundation that kept me grounded even as I built my empire." I remembered my shock, my disbelief at his premonitions, his assumptions that he would be torn from me so abruptly. Yet as the cruel fates would have it, his instincts proved correct. Just 3 days after penning this letter, he suffered a massive coronary during one of his morning meetings. The words blurred on the page as my vision swam with tears. This couldn't be the end. Not like this. Not after everything we had built together. Not after the ups and downs, the battles and battles won. Ethan had been my soulmate, my partner in crime. How could he be so cruelly ripped away? I continued reading, my chest tightening with every line. "I know without a doubt that Ava, Leo, and Nora will come after my assets like starving wolves the moment I'm gone." I could practically hear his wry chuckle through the ink. "They have revealed their true greedy, grasping natures to me, time and again. And while I have provided for them materially, I cannot allow them to descend like locusts, devouring every last flower in their path." My jaw clenched as I recalled the unseemly scene at the wake, those 3 circling like vultures, squabbling over Ethan's properties before he was even in the ground, just as he had predicted right here in these letters. "Which is why, my love, you must fight them." The letter's tone intensified, the scrawled handwriting pressing furiously into the paper. "You must fight to keep them from destroying the legacies we built, not just the business empire, but the future and security we crafted for Caleb." I caught my breath at the mention of our son's name. They cannot be allowed to sully his inheritance, his future, with their rapacious greed and toxic avarice. The words hung there, emphatic and absolute, a call to battle, one which Ethan knew would come even from beyond the grave. I remembered looking up from the letter, a steely resolve settling in my heart. My wonderful husband, he had been willing to take on this fight himself, against his own flesh and blood. But fate had intervened, leaving it to me to carry the torch. As I read on through the night, the path became clear. Ethan's instructions outlined the first salvo, the opening moves in what would surely be a high-stakes war, one which would determine not just the fate of my family's future, but justice itself. "Tell Derek I've left everything in readiness," the letter closed. "He'll know exactly what path we must take." I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of responsibility envelop me, but also the fortifying embrace of Ethan's trust. This was his wish, his final act to protect those he truly loved, and I would be damned if I'd fail him. Gripping the letter tightly, I rose and strode into Caleb's room. He started at my entrance, but I shushed him gently. "Don't worry, my sweet boy," I murmured, stroking his hair. "Your father has given us instructions, and I'll make sure we carry them out to the letter." Caleb opened his mouth, questions swimming in his eyes, but I just smiled, squaring my shoulders. "It's time we fight to protect our future." My hands trembled ever so slightly as I unfolded the second letter, those now familiar looping scrawls tantalizing me with their secrets. Despite the cold pit of dread that had taken up residence in my stomach, a frisson of anticipation coursed through me. What revelations awaited within these pages? What weapons had my brilliant husband prepared to battle his monstrous spawn? Caleb watched me intently, his wide eyes missing nothing. The poor boy had been rendered so quiet, so somber by the events of the past weeks, it pained me to see his usual sunny exuberance dimmed, but I forced a reassuring smile for his sake. "Your father always did have a flair for the dramatic." I winked conspiratorially. "Let's see what he's cooked up for us this time." The first few lines plunged into Ethan's signature mix of straightforward instruction and wry observation. "You've always been my most capable partner in all endeavors, my love, so I know I can trust you to handle this situation with utmost discretion and resolve." My eyes narrowed as I continued reading. The first step, it seemed, involved a series of carefully coded file names and instructions to access a secure server that Ethan had created unbeknownst to anyone else. Ever the forward planner, my brilliant husband, it seemed this was his meticulously prepared battleground from beyond the grave. After 15 tense minutes spent following the digital trail of coded breadcrumbs, a vast encrypted database unfurled before me, organized into a series of ominously named folders. Avarsk SB, Leo HBGS, Norask ML. I frowned, sharing a sidelong glance with Derek, who simply shrugged. The old fox was inscrutable as ever. Slowly, I began opening the files, each one decrypting to reveal a staggering array of documentation. Financial statements, third-party audits, private communications, even sealed legal records. What the? I felt the blood drain from my face. Those ingrates, those grasping amoral snakes. The files painted a lurid portrait of untold avarice and deception spanning decades. From Nora's carefully hidden money laundering schemes to Leo's gambling indiscretions that would make a Las Vegas pit boss blush, to Ava's flagrant abuse of corporate resources and funds for her personal gain, no ethical line had gone uncrossed. When my eyes finally regained focus, I realized I was gripping Derek's arm in a white-knuckle grip, the muscles in my jaw practically grinding from clenched rage. How dare they? How dare those monstrous, thankless leeches spend years deceiving and stealing from the very father who had nursed them back into his good graces, after his divorce from their snake of a mother? Those... I was practically spitting, struggling for words to encapsulate the searing fury searing through me. Caleb shrank back, alarmed by the inferno that must have been blazing in my eyes. How could they do this? What kind of vile, soulless creatures could inflict such harm on their own family who gave them everything? Derek's face was grave, his voice solemn. "Ethan wanted you to know the truth, Mira, to see exactly who and what you're dealing with." "I'll kill them." The words burst forth before I could stop them, guttural and vicious. Those... My mouth twisted in revulsion, the depths of their betrayal playing out in lurid detail before my mind's eye. Their smug smiles at the wake, their blithe piggish privilege as they plotted to carve apart their own father's estate without an ounce of shame. A crimson haze began creeping across my vision as memories of their past transgressions compounded into an unstoppable tsunami. The lies, the selfishness, the flagrant using and abusing of Ethan's goodwill at every turn. Derek's voice was a lifeline dragging me back from the abyss. This is why he made that plan, Mira. This is what we're fighting. Slowly, the fog receded, my senses reorienting around that single-minded focus of determination. Yes, Ethan had seen this all coming. He knew exactly what vicious brood of vipers he had brought into this world, their fangs dripping with venom the instant he succumbed. That was why he had made preparations, why he entrusted his beloved wife with the tools to stand tall and fight for the family's true legacy. With trembling hands, I gathered the documents, weapons for the battle to come. Cold hatred flooded my veins as images of their smug, venomous faces burned in my mind. "All right, you grasping bastards," I growled, squaring my shoulders. "Let's go to war." The sleek lines of my cherry-red Mercedes ate up the road as I sped through the rain-slicked streets, the world outside blurring into a kaleidoscope of neon and shadow. In the passenger seat, Derek's reflection glared back at me in the windshield, his jaw set in a grim line. "You're sure about this?" The question cut through the tense silence. I didn't miss a beat. Absolutely. My knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. It's time they answered for their depraved actions. In the rearview mirror, I could see Caleb's wide eyes peeking over the top of Ethan's stack of files cradled in his lap, the damning evidence of his deceitful siblings' myriad sins. The poor boy had been shocked into numbed silence upon seeing the extent of their treachery. Not that I could blame him. This had to end here and now. There would be no more poison seeping from that festering wound, no more degradation of the family legacy that Ethan had poured his life into upholding. If his own flesh and blood lacked the honor and ethics to protect it, then I would stand in the breach and do what needed to be done. We pulled up to the ornate law offices, all carved mahogany and polished brass, in a classic display of old money decadence. Ava's vehicle was already in its typical spot. Of course, the leech would have arrived early to start spinning her vile machinations. The second my heels hit the marble floor, her shrill tones assaulted my ears. "This is utterly preposterous." She stabbed a filed nail in Derek's direction as Leo and Nora ringed her like sullen bodyguards. "How dare you even entertain this insipid notion that our inheritance could possibly be impacted? I won't have it." Derek cleared his throat. "Your father's wishes were quite clear in his most recent will and estate documents. His instructions were—" "His instructions?" Ava's nostrils flared with undisguised rage. How convenient that he left instructions that so transparently favor his little boy toy over his own children. My grip tightened on Caleb's hand until my knuckles turned white. That classless harpy, how dare she slander Ethan's choices with her petty, ignorant jealousy. Still, I kept my expression neutral as I stepped forward, the binders of evidence clutched like deadly weapons. "There's something you should all see before we continue." I pitched my voice in a deadly calm tone. "Some information that has recently come to light regarding all of your activities." Ava opened her mouth, eyes glittering with malice. But Leo beat her to the punch with that familiar snide bark of laughter. "Oh, here we go with the histrionics. What's in those, huh? More of your little crocodile tears act to try and guilt us into money laundering." My words detonated like a bomb in the middle of their smug tirade, rendering them momentarily stunned into silence. I pressed on, keeping my voice even and measured. Embezzlement, tax evasion, fraud on massive scales totaling in the tens of millions over the past 2 decades. I held up the binders, letting them take in the sheer volume of evidence collected there. For all of it meticulously documented in these files, complete with third-party audits and legal documentation to back it up. An uneasy tension crept over their faces as a hush descended. I could see the gears churning as they grappled to process this sudden upending of the playing field. Then Leo spoke again, a desperate edge creeping into his mocking chuckle. "Those are preposterous allegations with no basis in fact, I'm sure. Just more pathetic lies and fabrications from this manipulative—" "They're all true." The softly spoken declaration lanced through the room with shocking potency, drawing every eye to Derek. He met their incredulous stares with an implacable mask. "Every single item in those files is true. documented, verified truth that can be substantiated in any court of law. He folded his hands calmly. Your father was well aware of your indiscretions over the years. He simply chose not to pursue them until his passing, at which point he ensured this information would be leveraged accordingly. The snakes were squirming now, beneath the blinding light of truth being shone into their squalid little burrow, faces paling and contorting with rage. But Ava still rallied with a last snarling burst of wounded entitlement. You liar! You pathetic old vulture, making up stories to try and steal what's rightfully ours! She wheeled on me, eyes wild. And you conniving little whore, always hanging on to father's coattails, thinking you could just take what belonged to his real family. I won't let you. I won't. Enough. Derek's tone brooked no argument. His own fury telegraphed in the flinty glare he leveled at the petulant heiress. When he spoke again, each word dripped with icy venom. You three have proven yourselves not only grasping ingrates, but hardened criminals of the worst order who manipulated and stole from your own father. With any luck, you'll end up behind bars for the myriad charges that will be filed once this evidence sees the light of day. In that moment, the world seemed to pivot on its axis, the balance of power shifting in an instant. The snakes had overplayed their hands for the final time, and now they had nowhere left to slither or strike. An eerie silence reigned in the aftermath as their faces crumbled into sickly parodies of outrage and horror. I almost pitied them in that instant, so naked and pathetic were their shattered delusions. Almost. Looping my arm through Caleb's, I steered him back towards the exit, Derek falling in beside us. A twisted smile tugged at the corners of my mouth as I spared one final glance over my shoulder. In the end, a child's greatest heartbreak is the realization that this is darkness that they were born into. Then we were gone, leaving them to their despair and just desserts. The game had changed, and the players were going to learn just how thoroughly. The familiar hush of the plush study enveloped me as I sank into the supple leather armchair. How many times had I sat here sipping aged scotch while Ethan regaled me with tales of his latest business exploits? This room had been his sanctum, his inner circle where only those closest to him were permitted entry. Now it was the war room. Derek set down a tray laden with file folders and sheaves of paper, his craggy face drawn into pensive lines. We're making progress on multiple fronts, but there are still some concerning developments brewing. I arched an eyebrow, gesturing for him to continue as Caleb curled up on the divan, listlessly stabbing at his tablet. The poor boy had been avoiding me lately, no doubt overwhelmed by the dark realities being unearthed about his own family. Another consequence of those snakes' poison to contend with. Ava's been working the media circuits, spinning her narrative about being unfairly persecuted and trying to assassinate your character. A muscle ticked in Derek's jaw. He'd never been able to mask his disdain for Ethan's eldest. Rage flickered through me, though I fought to keep my expression impassive. Of course the wretch would stoop to such depths in her desperation, spreading salacious lies in a bid to sway the inevitable court of public opinion that would weigh in once this all went public. Still, I allowed myself a small predatory smile. If public sentiment is what she wants to play for, we'll gladly oblige her. Derek's eyebrows rose quizzically, even as understanding glinted in his eyes. With a few deft keystrokes, I activated the Media Blitz protocol Ethan had shown me, setting a vast factory of bloggers, pundits, and social media influencers into motion. Within minutes, the first damaging leaks began sprinkling across the internet, tantalizing whiffs of the snake's crimes, hitting just the right marks to whet appetites. There, I stated with grim satisfaction. Let's see how well her crocodile tears hold up against the documented facts of her family's misdeeds. Information was power, and Ethan had stockpiled enough ammunition for the mother of all wars on this front. Thanks to his paranoid foresight and meticulous records, any attempts at disinformation or suppression would prove futile against the tidal wave about to crash down upon Ava and her cohorts. Turning back to the files, I rifled through them with renewed vigor. What else do we have? There's no such thing as too much leverage. Derek nodded, expression hardening. I've also uncovered some disturbing activity around Ethan's companies that points to potential corporate sabotage attempts from our adversaries. My head snapped up. Explain. A number of concerning personnel moves and expenditure discrepancies at some of the subsidiary branches. Derek extracted a folder, handing it to me. Here are the accounting audits. It looks like funds are being diverted into some shadowy slush areas, likely to fuel further disruptions. Those wretched snakes, I hissed, scanning the documents with mounting disbelief and rage. Not content with robbing their own father and betraying his legacy, now they want to burn it all down, too. Of course they would stoop to such reprehensible depths. Their venomous greed and bitterness knew no bounds. Principles be damned. If they couldn't have Ethan's empire for themselves, they were determined to scorch the earth and salt the remains. Well, not on my watch. The phone was to my ear before conscious thought, muscle memory taking over as I rapidly punched in a coded sequence. When the line picked up, I didn't waste time with preamble. Wade, it's Mira. We have a situation brewing. Possible infiltrators trying to compromise our holdings. I laid out the details in crisp, precise phrases, feeling a feral sort of satisfaction at the clipped, flinty responses from the other end. Ethan's head of corporate security had always been one of the family's staunchest loyalists and a consummate professional when it came to neutralizing threats. Derek watched me with an approving nod as I terminated the call, already mapping out our next actions. We'd hit them from every angle, whether slithering snakes or cunning serpents. Starting with locking down anything they tried to sink their greedy fangs into. A muffled gasp drew my attention across the room, where Caleb sat frozen, hand over his mouth and eyes wide with shock. Before I could react, his whispered words dropped like a lead weight. Mom. The house. The security alert klaxon had already begun blaring by the time my feet hit the polished marble foyer downstairs. In one blistering glance through the reinforced windows, the full extent of the Viper's strike revealed itself. Glass shattered, gates torn open, windows smashed. An entire tactical team of masked intruders storming the premises, fanning out with cold precision. And at their core, striding with a victorious sneer, leading the charge, Ava. My heart stopped. No, not my home, not my sanctuary. My fists clenched in rage even as my mind whirred with sickening realization. The sudden activity around Ethan's assets. It had all been a feint, a diversion to draw our scrutiny away while the real play unfolded on our own doorstep. They were going for the jugular and hitting where it would hurt most. Derek exploded from the study, slamming his fist against the security lockdown switch as Wade's team began engaging the invaders. We're cut off outside! They've trapped us inside! My world narrowed to a single point of blazing fury as Ava's triumphant laughter rang out, muffled through the ballistic glass yet still scraping like nails. Did you really think it would be that easy, you sanctimonious bitch? She leveled the barrel of her rifle directly at me with a feral grin. Time to burn it all down, starting with you. Checkmate, it seemed. The first thunderous volley of fire impacted against the windows as I pulled Caleb flush against me. So this was how it would end then, betrayed and outmaneuvered by those we should have been able to trust most. I met Derek's stricken gaze over Caleb's bowed head with a look of grim determination. No, not the end. The counterattack was just beginning. The muzzle flashes from Ava's assault rifle seemed to stretch into lurid slow motion, each round hammering against the reinforced windows in percussive bursts. Shards of shattered glass exploded inward, stinging my exposed skin as I shielded Caleb with my body. My mind raced even as fear clenched my gut. How could it have come to this? Gunfire and blood mere feet from where my darling Ethan used to read bedtime stories to our son. This home we had built together, now befouled by the very snakes who worshipped at the altar of their own greed. Safe room. Derek's shout cut through the cacophony as he hauled Caleb and I towards the hidden panic bunker. My mind flashed to the countless drills we had practiced even as the floorboards gave way beneath our feet, swallowing us into the fortified bolt hole. My world shrank to bare concrete walls and the acrid smell of explosives residue as Derek sealed the entrance behind us. Caleb was shaking violently, pupils dilated with shock as he clung to me. My own heart hammered painfully, but I forced my features into a mask of calm resolution. Shh! It's okay, my sweet boy. I murmured, stroking his hair as I once did when he suffered night terrors. We're safe in here. Nothing can hurt us. A wry snort from the corner drew my attention to where Wade emerged from the shadows, eyes hard. Yeah, for now, maybe. But those psychopaths aren't going to give up so easily. Derek shot him a warning glare, even as he ushered Caleb and me towards the bank of reinforced monitors lining one wall. My breath caught in my throat at the images playing out. A full-scale assault in progress, dozens of masked gunmen ravaging our home under Ava's crazed direction. The footage cut dizzyingly between the sweeping security cameras dotting the premises. A fresh wave of nausea rolled through me at the devastation, at the wanton disregard for anything other than their rapacious spite. Furniture smashed, paintings shredded, decades of treasured memories simply ruined in an instant, all at the hands of the very monsters I once called family. Ava appeared again on one monitor, face twisted into a garish leer as she tossed a priceless antique vase through a set of French doors. "Come out! Come out!" She taunted in a saccharine sing-song, pivoting her rifle in slow arcs. "Don't you want to surrender and make this nice and easy?" I felt bile rise in my throat even as my grief and shock calcified into blistering rage. Easy? There would be nothing nice or easy about the reckoning to come, not after this unforgivable transgression, not after the bloodshed they had wrought upon hallowed ground. On another screen, Leo and Nora prowled through Ethan's study, gleefully upending bookshelves and smashing heirlooms beneath the butts of their rifles. An arc of crimson fury lashed across my vision at the wanton defilement of my beloved husband's inner sanctum. How dare they? How dare those mongrels defile what had been so sacred, so integral to the man they once claimed to love? We need to hit them back. The words dropped like granite between clenched teeth, and we need to hit them hard. Derek shifted, the worry lines etched deeper than I'd ever seen them. We're outnumbered and outgunned here, Mira. A direct confrontation would be suicide. My hands balled into white-knuckled fists, quivering with the effort of restraint. Easy for him to say, from the safety of our bolt hole, while that scourge continued to pillage and defile with impunity. Didn't he understand that there were some sins that could never be forgiven, some stains that could never be washed clean? I rounded on Wade, desperation clawing at the edges of my resolve. Tell me you have something, some way to strike back at them, to make them pay for what they've done. The grim-faced commando regarded me steadily for a long moment before giving a slow nod. We always plan for the worst contingencies. His finger stabbed a control, and a fresh bank of monitors flickered to life, displaying a dizzying array of maps, deployment patterns, weapon schematics, and other technical details. The way I see it, we've got two main options. Either go loud with stun grenades and tactical breach teams, or slip in quieter from the maintenance tunnels and hit 'em where they sleep. My jaw clenched as I studied the contingencies. Both were risky, both carried the potential for deadly escalation if things went sideways. But after what I just witnessed, after the depraved disregard for any shred of human decency, such delicacy seemed quaint. "Do it," I growled, feeling as if I were shedding the last vestiges of civilized constraint. "Hit them with everything we've got. Make the snakes. Burn them down if you have to. I don't care anymore." Wade's obsidian gaze remained steady even as a feral grin slowly crept across his features. "Yes, ma'am." 10 minutes later, a precisely synchronized symphony of thunder shook the compound. Chaotic screams and the hair-raising concussions of stun grenades battered the audio pickups. I watched in cold silence as Ava shrieked and clawed at her blinded eyes, fumbling for her weapon as the first assault teams descended, only to be met head-on by the grim-faced heavy weapons squads emerging from the tunnels, firepower barking in controlled metronomic bursts. Caleb recoiled in horror, ears ringing from the proximity blasts and eyes clamped shut as the nightmare played out before us. But I simply drank in every millisecond of unfolding carnage, allowing the numbing ice of vengeance to seep into my marrow. They had awoken a nest of hornets, and the stinging reprisal would be exquisite. My mouth curved ever so slightly as the tear gas canisters detonated, engulfing Ava in choking white clouds as her shrieks devolved into wet, gurgling sobs. Surrender? My voice was a low rasp, barely audible over the din of combat. Not a chance. The words kindled like sparks before roaring into an unstoppable inferno of heedless indignation. "You started a war tonight." and I'm going to make thrice damned sure you burn. The courtroom galleries were packed to the rafters, a veritable sea of suits and sharp angles punctuated by the intermittent clicks of cameras from the media pit. A low buzz of anticipation thrummed through the air, sparking with unseen currents of electricity as we awaited the arrival of the presiding judge. Beside me, Derek's expression was carved from granite, giving away none of the exhaustion or strain that etched his features after months of endless motions and legal wrangling. This would be the culmination, the deciding salvo in our battle to hold those treacherous vipers accountable not just for their sordid crimes, but for the very souls they had bartered away to the demons of greed and entitlement. When the bailiff finally announced the judge's entrance, a hush blanketed the room, allowing every muted footstep and rustling whisper to resonate obscenely. I inhaled deeply, steeling myself against the rising tide of anger and disgust that threatened to overwhelm me as Ava, Leo, and Nora were led in, still defiant in the face of their impending judgment. My nails dug crescents into my palms as I drank in their appearances. Ava's once haughty mask reduced to a twisted caricature of barely contained rage, Leo's perpetual sneer now tinged with naked fear, and Nora. Poor, pathetic Nora, whose cowardice and moral vacancy had condemned her to this fate alongside her monstrous siblings. They huddled together, shooting venomous glares and muttered asides like truculent children, even as their legions of millionaire attorneys fussed and preened. Pathetic, simply pathetic, the lot of them. This twisted family, if it could even be called that, had sown the whirlwind, and now they would reap the harvest of their unforgivable transgressions. I refused to allow even a glimmer of pity to take root in my heart, not after the blood spilled and atrocities committed in their death throes. No, if anything, they should count themselves fortunate to still be breathing after that fateful night. As the preliminary matters droned on in that somnolent legalese, my mind replayed the vivid images seared into its darkest recesses. The muzzle flashes bathing Ava's contorted mask in demonic shades as the opening salvo rained down. Leo's wretched screams as the fast-rope teams punched through the shattered windows in a hail of debris. Nora recoiling with very real terror as the piano wire traps shredded her would-be cover into splinters. By the time our forces had arrived, the courtyard resembled a bombed-out war zone, furniture and fixtures smashed and blasted into matchwood, elaborate frescoes obliterated by insensate gunfire, centuries-old heirlooms reduced to ash and echoes. My own home, our sanctuary, butchered on the twisted altar of their petty vindictiveness and depraved rapacity. Every ounce of mercy, of restraint, that may have dwelled within me withered away in those harrowing hours as the assault unfolded. Whatever pitiful dregs of family allegiance still lingered shriveled up and died amidst the maelstrom of hatred and revulsion that engulfed me. And when at last that final, glorious moment arrived, Ava and her cohorts disarmed, bloodied, forced to their knees amidst the smoldering ruins of their doomed siege, I knew there could be no forgiveness, not for them and the unforgivable evil they had unleashed. Please, Nora's trembling plea, barely audible, cut through the ringing in my ears as powerfully as any gunshot. Mira, please, it wasn't supposed to go this far, as if summoning the very last dregs of her moral cowardice could somehow undo the atrocities, the wanton devastation surrounding us. My gut twisted with reviled contempt. Ava, ever the irredeemable monster, spat a curse rebuke that withered on her bloodied lips even as I strode forward, the barrel of my sidearm leveled with uncompromising precision. Don't. The word lashed out with all the blistering finality of a gunshot. You don't get to beg. My voice was low, laced with a vitriol so pure and distilled that it seemed to sear the very air. You don't get to plead or whimper or cry now after everything you've done. Despite the protests of the surrounding forces, I continued my advance until I stood mere feet from my quarry, staring down into those sunken pits of hatred and shame they dared call eyes. Only then, basking in the weight of their impotent fury, did I allow my mouth to crease into the slightest of vindicated sneers. Your actions forfeited any such leniency the moment you decided to sacrifice everything, your names, your legacies, your very souls, on the pyre of your greed. The muzzle loomed inexorably, daring them to protest further. Ava and Leo were actually quailing now, some dim flicker of self-preservation kindling behind their masks of bravado, while Nora simply crumbled, fat tears streaking down her blotched cheeks. So it would be then. They could gnash and howl at their ill fortunes, lash out like the beasts they had revealed themselves to be. But in the end, we would have the last, most decisive word. My finger tightened fractionally on the trigger as decades of insults, betrayals, and unspeakable acts of depravity washed over me, prepping me for the coup de grace, only to be halted by Derek's gruff tones. "You're right, Mira. They don't deserve any mercy. Not with all the undeniable proof we've compiled of their grotesque criminality over the years." The old wolf stepped forward, a satisfied glint in his eyes as he savored the disbelieving horror dawning across the snake's features. Which is why it will be a jury of their peers, untainted by these nauseating displays of arrogance and vice, who dictates their ultimate punishment. Long, lengthy prison sentences from which hopefully they emerge having reclaimed some shred of dearly lost humanity. I faltered, anger wavering for the briefest instant as Derek pressed his advantage. Or they can choose the path of unfettered ruination, consuming themselves with hatred until they're nothing but hollow, empty husks alongside the wreckage of everything your father strived to build. He placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, grip vice-like. But that decision is now out of our hands. We've won, Mira. It's time to step back from the abyss and let justice and truth reclaim their rightful place. My grip slackened, digits numb as the weight of his words impacted me. Of course, Ethan would want no blood on our hands, no matter how sorely tested our resolve. This was never about vengeance or sordid reprisals, but upholding the ideals he had embodied till his last breath. I met Ava's hate-filled, incredulous glare with a look of implacable resolve. "Don't mistake this for mercy or forgiveness," I rasped with finality. "Just the inevitability of karma finally catching up to dole out its judgments." As if on cue, the courtroom doors banged open, admitting a flood of bailiffs who quickly swarmed to take custody of the vipers, slapping heavy manacles around their wrists. Nora was openly hysterical now, Leo petrified in disbelief while Ava still clung to her indignant rage like a shipwreck victim, grasping flotsam. "This isn't over, you pathetic excuse for a human being." She thundered over the cacophony, straining against her restraints. "You think this little stunt means you've won? My father's precious legacy ends here, bitch. We made sure of it." But her seething bravado was just so much hollow bravado in the face of the implacable tide sweeping her away. I simply watched impassively, finally at peace. Wrong again, I'm afraid. The words carried the quiet weight of inevitability itself. The only thing ending here today is your poisonous delusions. One by one, their hollow threats and blusterings faded into the ether alongside their departing forms. And as they were finally dragged from the court, I felt a lightness in my chest, as if a decades-old weight had finally been lifted away. Next to me, Derek arched a wry eyebrow, the ghost of a smile creasing his features for the first time in ages. "You did it, Mira. It's over." And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt my lips curve in a genuine, unfettered smile. Not of vengeance or triumph, but of the promise of redemption that lay ahead, a true legacy being born from the ashes of greed and hate. "No, Derek." I gave his hand in grateful squeeze. We did, and with Caleb at my side, we turned and walked out into the future, come what may. The soft breeze carried the scents of freshly turned earth and newly sprouted blooms, perfuming the crisp morning air with the promise of rebirth and renewal. I savored each inhalation, allowing the tranquil melodies of nature to wash over me as my fingers traced the carved letters on the granite headstone. Beloved husband, father, friend. 1968. So many memories, joyous and heartbreaking, triumphant and sorrowful, crystallized in those simple words and dates. An entire life and legacy distilled into cold, unfeeling stone, except not unfeeling, not anymore. The graveled path crunched softly behind me as Caleb approached, hands shoved into the pockets of his well-worn denim jacket, the one Ethan had gifted him on his 12th birthday only days before the fateful heart attack. My breath hitched at the sight of him, now standing eye-level to me, the same soulful hazel eyes regarding me with profound wisdom far beyond his 16 years. "You okay, Mom?" His voice was gentle, the last vestiges of adolescence still clinging to its timbre. I managed a wan smile, gesturing for him to join me. Just remembering is all. My fingers traced Ethan's name almost reverently as Caleb draped his arm around my shoulders, solid and reassuring. For long moments, we stood in companionable silence, united by the memories both joyous and haunting that permeated this hallowed space. Eventually, I felt composed enough to continue. Your father was the most brilliant, passionate man I ever knew, right until the very end. I exhaled a tremulous sigh, leaning into Caleb's strength, both emotional and physical. He poured every ounce of his being into building his dreams, his legacy. And the sick part was how those he sought to include most of all were the ones who ended up trying to tear it all down. Caleb stiffened slightly, doubtlessly remembering those harrowing final days and the devastation wrought by his own flesh and blood. I pressed on, needing to exorcise these last vestiges of the poison. For months after the trial, I was consumed by hatred and anger toward them. The words tasted like ash on my tongue. It was like this all-consuming fire burning through me, torturing me with every waking moment, stoking my need for vengeance. I chanced a sidelong glance at my son's impassive features, searching for any traces of judgment or disdain. But his regard remained steady, constant, allowing me to unburden myself without fear of reprisal. At the time, it felt like the only way to cauterize the wound they had inflicted. The betrayal, the wanton devastation, like nothing else could ever let me achieve peace. My words grew softer, more reflective. But that wasn't true healing, it was just piling more hurt and anger on top of the first. Your father wouldn't have wanted that. He never let his quest drag him down into that darkness. He stayed focused on upholding the ideals and integrity that drove him. Caleb nodded slowly. He wanted to build and create, not just companies and empires, but something greater. His hand found mine, giving a reassuring squeeze. Something to protect people and give them shelter from the kinds of toxicity and hatred that fuels so much greed and wrongdoing. My throat constricted with a swell of pride at his insight and maturity. When had my bright-eyed little boy blossomed into this poised, insightful young man? I blinked back the mistiness prickling my eyes. Yes, exactly. And now it's up to us to carry that torch and continue his mission. Straightening my shoulders, I turned to fully face my son, cupping his cheek in my palm. Which is why I've decided to honor his memory by establishing the Coleman Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to researching and developing preventative behavioral programs for at-risk demographics. Understanding blossomed across Caleb's features, swiftly followed by that infectious grin I remembered so fondly from his childhood. You mean? I matched his smile with one of my own, feeling lighter than I had in years. That's right. If there's even the slightest chance we can help other families avoid the ugliness and toxicity that plagued ours, then we owe it to your father's legacy to make that effort. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, simply basking in the prospect of authoring a new, brighter chapter free from the shackles of bitterness and anger. When Caleb finally broke the silence, his voice was thick with emotion. He'd be proud of you, Mom, of both of us. I pulled him into a fierce embrace, feeling the contours of the man he had become pressed against me, Ethan's living legacy. I think he would be too, sweetheart. My eyes found the carved epitaph, as if seeking benediction from beyond the veil. Because this is what it was always about, not punishing those blinded by their sins, but protecting and uplifting those still caught in darkness so they can find the light. Arm in arm, we turned and strode from the quiet peace of the memorial gardens, ready to face the future head-on with clear eyes and open hearts. The cycle of negativity and greed would end, and a new age of healing and positivity would beckon all those with the courage to seize it. It was time to carve a new legacy, built on the ashes of the old, one Ethan himself would be proud to call his own.